Hello and welcome to the EcoCast by Actual Tech Media. Today's topic, protecting endpoints, human and technical solutions. Thank you so much for joining us on the EcoCast. On this event, you'll hear from our experts from KnowBe4, Sophos, Huntress, Rapid7, CrowdStrike, Duo, and CyberArk. This is going to be a really cool event. This is a hot topic out there for everyone in the IT organization. Before we get started, you should know that we at Actual Tech Media created the MegaCast and EcoCast event series to help educate IT professionals such as yourselves about the latest and greatest in enterprise tech, to help you to do it quickly and efficiently without ever having to leave your home or office, to help you get all your questions answered and have some fun in the process, maybe even win a prize. Now, before we get started, there's just a few things that you should know. We, of course, encourage your questions there in the questions pane of your audience console. We even have a best question prize to help further encourage those questions. I'll be talking about that here in just a moment. We'll also have some poll questions for you during the event. We appreciate your feedback on those polls. We want this to be a social event as well. You can tweet directly from your audience console, and the hashtag for today will be automatically appended. And then finally, in the handouts tab there, you can find some excellent resources hand-selected by today's expert presenters. I'm talking about trial links, ebooks, solution briefs, and more. Now, the prizes on the EcoCast today are 3 Amazon $500 gift cards. You must be live in attendance to qualify, and the winner will be announced by me, your moderator, during the event. We also have our best question prizes. These are for $50 Amazon gift cards, one for each of the Q&A sessions that we have on today's EcoCast. Of course, you must meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions to be entered into the prize drawing for the best question, as well as our 3 Amazon $500 gift cards. All prize winners have the option to make a donation to selected charities, and prize winners must submit an IRS Form W-9 to Actual Tech Media. We will reach out to you via email after the event. Over the years, we've donated thousands of dollars to the charities that you see here on the screen, thanks to generous prize winners. If you win a prize and you'd like to help someone less fortunate, we would love to help you do that. The hashtag for today on Twitter is ATM EcoCast, and you can follow Actual Tech Media and me, your moderator, David M. Davis, as well. Subscribe to all the Actual Tech Media social channels, YouTube, Facebook, and the 10 on Tech podcast, as well as our LinkedIn channel. You can do that right there in your audience console. You'll also find a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club in the Handouts tab. This is where you can download free, easy-to-read enterprise IT books authored by top industry experts. It's a great way to stay up to date on enterprise tech. And yes, these are all free. Another great way to win a prize is to refer an IT friend or coworker to Actual Tech Media's online events, and you both could win a $300 Amazon gift card. Those prize drawings are held each month, and we promise not to spam your friends or coworkers. We'll send them an invitation to an upcoming list of events. If they don't respond, we'll send them one more reminder, and then we won't bother them after that. You can refer your IT friends and coworkers right there in your Handouts tab where it says Refer a Friend. And at the end of the EcoCast, you'll be automatically redirected to our Refer a Friend page as well. I'm excited now to bring in our friend, Mr. Ned Bellavance. He's a speaker, writer, author of numerous video training courses over in the Pluralsight library, and he has a big following over on YouTube thanks to his excellent content. I encourage you all to check it out. Ned, it's always great to have you back on. Take it away.
What's up, everybody? It's Ned Bellavance, Ned1313 on Twitter, and I'm here to talk to you today about 4 tips for improving your information security posture. So let's get started with tip number 1. Now, a phrase that I've heard fairly often is information security is everyone's responsibility. Everyone in your organization is responsible for improving information security. It's a nice thought. But another thing that I've heard many times is if it's everyone's responsibility, then it's no one's responsibility. So how do you square those two opposing viewpoints? I think the way that you do that is by creating a scope of responsibility for different people within your organization. If you just say that it's everybody's responsibility, that's not really helpful. But if you tell your end users, these are the exact things that you're responsible in information security, they're much more likely to listen and apply what you're saying. In addition, you have to make sure that that scope of responsibility is clearly communicated so they definitely know what they're responsible for, and also that it's not so arduous that it gets in the way of them accomplishing their actual job, the actual activities they need to do to get their work done. As soon as you start putting too many obstacles in place, folks are either going to ignore your obstacles if they can or work around them if they can't. So my first tip is, yes, InfoSec is everyone's responsibility, but you need to provide your end users with a clear scope of responsibility and make sure that it's not overly onerous for them to apply it to their day-to-day activities. Now, of course, as much as we want to believe that we're all perfect human beings and we're going to successfully take what you've been telling us and apply it to our practices, there's going to be failures. People are fallible. And that brings me to my second point. Assume breach and minimize the level of impact. What do I mean by that? Well, even in the best possible scenario, end users are fallible, including us, and we make mistakes, and we don't always follow the best guidance, or things just get past us. It's entirely possible. And because of that, you either have already been breached or you're going to be breached soon. It's not a matter of if you have a security incident, it's more of a when. So bearing that in mind, you have to assume that a breach is going to happen or already has. And your job now is to do what you can to minimize the impact of that breach in the larger organization. Let's take an example of an end user whose credentials are compromised because they followed a phishing link. They got fooled by a fake help desk email and they handed over their current password, and now an attacker has access to their account. You, as a security person or someone who's helping write the security policy, needs to think of, how can I prevent the attacker from expanding? Because the standard practice is to land and expand. If they can get access to the end user's machine, what are they going to do? They're going to look and see what that end user has access to and also plumb the machine to see if there's any other accounts that have logged onto that machine that they can then compromise and escalate their level of privilege. So that's standard operating procedure. With that in mind, start thinking about ways that you can minimize the impact of an account that's been breached. What are a few ways you could do that? Well, one possible way is to detect anomalous behavior. If Joe is the person that's compromised and Joe works in sales, if you see Joe's account suddenly accessing all of this financial data, that should send up a red flag. Something's going on with Joe's account. And there's a bunch of software solutions that will help you do that. Another example of how you can improve things is never log on to a workstation with your domain admin credentials. This is something I've seen many times, even though I'm not supposed to. Joe has a problem. I'm trying to solve the problem. I know if I log in as domain admin, I can fix his problem, but now my credentials are on that machine. And if that machine is compromised, my domain admin is compromised, and so is the entire organization. So that's two good examples of just simple things you could do to improve that security because you're coming from a place of assume breach. Now, I did mention that there's solutions out there to help you. And that gets us to the next concept, defense in depth. Now, I know what you're thinking, defense in depth. That means putting as many security layers on as you can, because the more layers you have, the more secure you are, right? Wrong. You are possibly less secure if you put too many layers in there. Now, why might that be? What is a security layer or a security control? It's usually going to be some kind of software. And what do we know about software? Well, software has vulnerabilities, and it needs to be patched on a regular basis. And it also needs to be configured properly. So imagine you've got 10 different security solutions because you believe in defense in depth and you've really layered it on there. You have to make sure that you're checking for vulnerabilities in all of those 10 different solutions, that you're keeping all of those solutions patched, and that they're all configured properly. One of those layers being improperly configured could create an attack vector for a potential hacker, And now, instead of being a security solution increasing your security, it's actually decreased and created an attack vector. That's bad. So the standard keep it simple, silly, really applies here. You should have as much security as you need to accomplish your security goal, which is preventing breaches and then containing them if they happen, but not so much security that you can't manage and keep up to date with it. It's better to not have a security control at all than one that is poorly configured, because then you have a false sense of security and the attacker ends up getting in anyway. So defense in depth is good, but you have to keep it simple. Only let it go to the level of complexity that actually meets your security requirements. And that rolls into the last point that I have. All your security solutions should be policy driven. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, you should not be going directly into firewalls and configuring 5 tuples if you can help it. Modern security tools really take an intent and policy-based approach. Why is that better? Because the chances of you misconfiguring something when you're down in the guts of a security tool is pretty high. But if you can trust that you can craft a policy which is then interpreted by an engine and applies the proper controls where you need them, then you're probably going to have a higher success rate of configuring something properly. In addition, it allows you to bring in other folks into the security conversation. Maybe it's the application development team, maybe it's the database team. If they can express their security needs with intent and policy, instead of knowing all the bits and bytes that go into any given security tool, it's going to make it that much easier to assess if your security posture is good and make sure that it's being applied consistently. So any security tool that you're evaluating should use policy and should have a central place of control for configuration. And don't forget about the maintenance for that thing, the patching and removal of vulnerabilities. Those are my 4 tips for improving your information security posture. Let's go over them one more time very quickly. Number 1, yes, InfoSec is everyone's responsibility, but each of those people needs a clearly defined scope of responsibility. Number 2, assume breach and do what you can to minimize the impact of that breach. Number 3, defense in depth is great, but only make it as deep as absolutely necessary. Keep it simple when you can. And lastly, any security tool that you use should have a policy-based approach. That's going to do it for me for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to find me, again, it's Ned1313 on Twitter, or you can find me on my website, nedinthecloud.com. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of the event.
Thanks so much, Ned. It's always great to have you on the event. I always learn so much from your presentations. I've just brought up a poll question here for everyone on the event. First poll of today's EcoCast. The poll on the screen is simply around your time frame. What's your time frame for taking some action to add new security-related tools or update your existing security tools? And if you haven't responded to these types of polls before, you just do it right there in the slides window. So we appreciate your feedback on this. And we've got our first presenter here in the green room ready to go. I'll be introducing you to him in just a moment. All right. Thank you to everyone who responded to the poll there. We've got a number of polls coming, of course, during the event, one after each presentation. And we always appreciate your feedback out there in the audience. All right. So with that, I'm excited now to introduce you to our first presenter on today's EcoCast. Welcome to James McQuiggin, Security Awareness Advocate at KnowBe4. Hey, James, thanks for being on.
Oh, thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, take it away.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Real excited to be presenting to you today with regards to culture breeds security. And as we kind of look at how a security culture can help reduce those breaches and data attack, cybersecurity attacks that we get by looking at investing in the users, of course. So as we look here at the slide you see, here's me, security awareness advocate, know before. I'm also a college professor as well, so I love to talk about cybersecurity. So one of the things when I joined Know Before that really impressed me was the fact that we want to make sure that we can help organizations manage the issue of social engineering, because that's what we see so often. That's how cyber criminals are getting into these organizations. And for me personally, the fact that we want to enable employees to make smarter security decisions every day is the way to go about it, and looking at changing those behaviors and changing those mindsets. And personally, I always want to make sure that we can help people make smarter security decisions every day. Because humans are the biggest attack vector, plain and simple. We're seeing that with regards to reports from Verizon, the annual report that comes out every year. Social engineering is one of that top ways. We're seeing that's how a lot of the time cyber criminals are getting in. Yes, the other ways are through unpatched systems or insider threats or those type of actions. But essentially, a lot of the times we're seeing it's because somebody got phished or they were socially engineered. And while I say that the humans are the biggest attack vector, I say that because there's a tendency a lot of time people like to say, humans are the weakest link. And for me, a lot of that comes down to the fact that there just hasn't been enough education, but then also trying to make sure that they understand the why that goes along with that as well. Because for me, people are a critical layer within the fabric of your security programs. Yes, we've got all those awesome little blinky boxes and subscriptions that we pay for every year, but also we have people that are configuring those. We also have people as our end users, because essentially anybody with an email address in your organization has a digital key to your front door. So what we're going to go through and touch upon today in the next 20 minutes or so is kind of go over the awareness, talk about behaviors, and look at some security culture, ways to incorporate that within your organization. So essentially the ABCs here of security training. Now, I've been involved in IT and cybersecurity for well over 20 years now. And one of the first things that I was able to do was I figured out Forrest Gump's password. I was actually able to hack into his computer because I guessed his password, because it was 1, Forrest, 1. So I won't confirm or deny that there's more of these cheesy dad jokes in here, so you just have to pay attention. So let's talk about awareness. Essentially, security awareness and training is key within a lot of organizations, and I know that there's folks out there that love to argue this topic, but essentially for us, and what we've seen successful with organizations is having a successful awareness program, having that training, going through, educating your users, assessing them, just like even if you were doing a vulnerability assessment within an organization, going up against the web applications or the firewalls. This is just another one of those access points, like I was saying, with regards to that email. Go through and then review the results. But one of the things a lot of people think of is the fact that when it comes to your phishing assessments, we've seen that it does reduce those the different attacks. You're reducing the number of opportunities of allowing cyber criminals into an organization. Normally when you start out, you've got 1 in every 3 people in your organization that are susceptible to a phishing attack. And after going through and doing that training and that assessments, and continually working through it, you're going to get it down to less than 5%, almost 1 in every 20. So it's a lot easier on the IT folks and the cybersecurity team when you're now looking at, instead of 1 in every 3, it's 1 in every 20 folks. So it certainly helps reduce the risk within the organization, and that's one of the key things. But when it comes to the phishing assessments, the thing to think about is the fact that it's not a gotcha moment. You're not trying to capture or get your employees in a gotcha moment and feel that, we got you with this latest phishing attack. It's not that. It's a teaching moment. We're there. And sometimes this is what a lot of folks don't understand. And I know I've been in that situation before as well, because you get that phishing assessment and you end up falling and clicking for that link. And you go through these phases where you're in denial. It's like, no, I hovered over it or I clicked on it, but then I closed the browser down. And then you get angry because, oh, great, now I got to go through and do this training. There's that shock of the fact that you've clicked the link. And then eventually you get to an acceptance point where you go, okay, fine. Now I have to make sure that I hover the link, check it, and so forth. Because when you have your security awareness program, the thing to think about is to think like an attacker. Think how the cyber criminals are going to attack. What kind of phishing emails are your people going to fall for, be susceptible to? And then plan that like a marketer, where it's a great way to team up with the marketing team, get their buy-in, and be able to release different content throughout the year based on departments, based on level in the organization. What kind of information is going to go out? Is it going to be a particular type of training? Is it going to be particular phishing emails? Mix up those phishing emails as well, because that's a big thing. Because you're looking for that engagement to help reinforce it with your users, and keeping it fresh and having different things rather than the same training year after year. Otherwise, it just gets boring. So you want to keep that fresh. But there's three realities to it when we talk about awareness. And one is, just because I'm aware doesn't mean I care. And the easy example for that is, hey, I'm driving down the highway. I see the speed limit says 70 miles an hour, but I'm doing 80. I'm taking the risk that I won't get caught by the police. But pretty well, as we all know, we see the cop sitting on the side of the road, and the foot comes off the gas, or we tap the brakes a little bit. We're aware of the fact that the speed limit's 70 miles an hour, and we're doing 80. We're aware of the fact that I'm supposed to hover over the links, but I'm in a hurry. I'm trying to clear up my inbox. So that's one of the realities a lot of folks don't realize. If you try to work against human behavior or human nature, you're going to fail. You know, a lot of the time where the InfoSec or the IT department is the department of no, when folks want to stand up servers or equipment, they're going, hey, can we do this? No. It's a matter of, okay, how about we try this, and looking at other ways. But what your employees do is certainly a lot more important than what they know. When you see employees that are reporting those phishes or checking people when they're coming into the building, if they've got their badges on, you know, those actions that help protect the organization, when they're doing that, it's a lot more important than just actually going through and learning it. So I want to cross into the behaviors now. Those actions start coming into our behaviors, because a lot of the time folks think, okay, I got my security awareness program, check, got the compliance program going, but that secure behavior isn't the same thing. And there's that intention gap that occurs, kind of like what we see here in the famous London Tube with the sign that says mind the gap. Again, we want to make sure that we're looking at that. But getting those behaviors is difficult. And BJ Fogg, who's pretty well the father of behavioral design, wrote a tweet. As you can see, it's 11 years ago. It still holds true today. The fact that, you know, within human nature, we're lazy, we're social, and we're creatures of habit. You know, lazy not in the sense that we're sitting on the couch every weekend, but lazy in the sense of like, I got to go ahead and learn something new. Okay, all right. It takes a little bit of effort for us to go through that. And whether we want to put forth that effort is another story altogether. We're social. We like to be around people. Well, most of us like to be around people. I know they're the introverts of the world. We like to have our own spot. But in general, a lot of folks are socially like that interaction, that human nature of wanting to help people. And we're creatures of habit. And all of that comes together where, you know, every day we like to do the same thing, or we have a routine every day and we're happy when we're able to do that. And if we're not, well, then it becomes problematic. But if you can design your products and your programs around that, that's going to go a long way. And when it comes to the behaviors, trying to change those, we're dealing with multiple aspects when it comes to our behaviors. You know, what you see, hear, what you know, what you say, what you feel, those are all combined in with our behaviors, linking to our responsibilities of what we're supposed to do within an organization. So if it's a policy, you know, there's that responsibility that we're supposed to do. But getting that behavior to change, you know, spending 18 years working at a little German company called Siemens, I went to a lot of power plants. And every power plant I went to always had that health and safety training video. Everybody had that mindset of health and safety, making sure that they were doing the right things so they didn't get hurt or, you know, have a catastrophic failure. The same thing kind of applies here when we're looking at those behaviors. We want to be able to modify those behaviors so that from a cyber standpoint, we can get people to make sure they're checking the links and using those strong passwords. Again, it's going to have to be a behavior change, and that's going to take a bit of effort. And a lot of that comes from the fact that three things have to happen. It has to be a motivation, has to be ability, and has to be a prompt. When you can get all those, then that behavior can be successful. So here's an example. Phishing emails. You know, you have that motivation. You want to make, the employee wants to make sure it's not a phishing link. They're going to hover over that. They don't want to have to do remedial training. You know, they want to make sure that they are actively protecting the organization. The ability, they know how to find the link. They've been educated and trained to look for those rogue URLs and what to look for within the link. And then they understand that makeup. And that comes from that training and education, and then hopefully being able to apply it. And the prompt from that is going to be, the email may appear strange. There's usually 3 questions I'm asking myself when it comes to emails. But do I know the person that sent it? Am I expecting the email? And are they asking me to do anything in a hurried manner or in an urgency type situation? If I'm any of those, I'm answering unfavorably with any of those, that's kind of raising that red flag for me. And then I take extra steps with regards to that. And that's the prompt there as well, is if you're able to go through and, are you expecting it? No. Okay. Do you know the person? No. Okay. Is there a hurried manner? Okay, well then maybe now I need to kind of take a step back and think through this email. But another aspect also comes from being able to nudge your folks towards the behavior. Case in point, and I apologize to any ladies that are on here having to look at a men's urinal, but in the airport in Amsterdam at Schiphol, the custodians every day would be going in and cleaning, and there'd always be a mess underneath all the urinals. So they decided to paint a little fly inside the urinal, because instead of rather putting up a sign that says, "Gentlemen, please be careful," they just put a fly in there, and it gave the men something to do. And lo and behold, underneath, it got a lot cleaner. Here we have the landfill and the recycle. You want to get people to recycle? You've got the nice shiny bottles. It's like, oh yes, I want to put it in there, not in the disgusting landfill. This one is another personal favorite. You want to get your kids to eat fruit. We know how hard that can be. Fruits and vegetables, a lot of times they don't. Here at a supermarket, at their eye level, they have free fruit available and a meter stick. So the kids can go around and eat fruit and see how tall they are, how big they're getting as they eat that fruit. It's that nudge towards eating better, eating a little more healthy. And then, of course, the ever famous getting donations rather than trying to fish money out of your pocket. Hey, you want to round up? It's another nudge towards getting to do that. And so we want to nudge them in the right direction. And we've seen this with passwords, these password signals where you've got an indicator telling you, okay, your password's not great, and so you put in a couple more characters, maybe some numbers, and it's like, oh, it goes yellow, and then you finally reach the length that meets all the requirements, and it turns green, and that gives you that indicator that, okay, great, yes, I've got a strong password. And so those strength meters can certainly help you nudge your audience towards creating those stronger passwords. Now, granted, the fact, a lot of time, many people just use the standard password and add a letter to the end, another number to the end of it, increase it by 1. Sometimes depending on your nudge meter, if you're able to determine what the old password was and make sure that the new one isn't similar, that helps as well. So, we hear about password attacks and we hear about cybercrime all the time, but anybody know why Superman doesn't fight cybercrime? Yeah, he's afraid of cryptocurrency. Okay. So let's touch upon culture. And this is kind of where, a lot of us have security awareness programs. We know that we want to try and get folks to change the behavior slightly. But now we're kind of getting towards the culture, as I touched upon and mentioned a little while ago, with regards to going to these power plants, that health and safety culture was ingrained with people. And so that's kind of where we're getting to now. We want that security culture in there. And that's kind of the reason why, and making sure users understand the reason why we're doing this. We may not like it. Yes, we got to go through this training. There's probably a tick box that goes along with it, but we're wanting this to be a part of the culture within the organization so that it helps protect the organization. So we don't end up on the front of the New York Times or on the news every night because we got hit with a ransomware breach. That's a lot of the time. And organizations do take security seriously. But again, sometimes somebody clicks on that link and opens up that proverbial electronic front door and lets in the cyber criminals. Now, when it comes to culture, we did a survey wanting to find out, do people take, security seriously, but how do you, and is security culture a part of your organization? And a lot of the time, as you can see from the results here, we had people that said they did. So then we said, how do you define culture? Let's make sure we're all on the same page here. And almost 30%, 1 in 3, said compliance to security policies. About a quarter of them said awareness and understanding security issues. 22%, security is everybody's responsibility. But 12% said security embedded in the organization. That's what security culture really is. And when we look at security culture, it's those ideas, customs, and those social behaviors that are going to impact your organization overall. But you have to be completely honest with what goals you're going to set with regards to your organizational culture, that how much they're going to tolerate. You're going to focus on, you don't want to be looking at trying to boil the whole ocean. You want to be looking at, one or two things at a time. And security awareness has evolved, and that's kind of where we're getting to now. We've had either our own in-house training where we created ourselves, and then maybe we did some phishing simulations. Then you started getting some metrics and data, based on maybe clean workstations, incidents that involve passwords, having to reset passwords, or ransomware attacks, those kind of things. And now we're getting into security culture where we want it permeating pretty well throughout the organization. People are aware, they understand the why overall. When you look at, you kind of, again, another chart here where you're looking at your security culture, you got, a lot of the time it starts off because it's a compliance requirement. Then you start getting into information sharing within the organization. Folks are becoming aware. One of the things, and I don't have a slide for it, but one of the things that I always like to talk about is when you in manufacturing or in an organization, like a plant or a warehouse, they always have those signs that say X number of days since the last safety incident or whatever. And I've always felt that should be posted around the organization as well. How many days since our last cyber incident? People a lot of the time aren't aware that your organization has cyber incidents. But if you were to have that posted and folks would be aware, it's like, oh, wow, we've gone 6 weeks without an incident, and then the clock changes and everybody gets upset. It's like, oh, we were doing so well. Having that's going to help drive that culture overall as well. And when you have a strong security culture, that leads, in one of the studies we did, 52 times less of an opportunity where someone's going to share credentials with that stronger security culture. So 5 ways that you can help grow it. Make sure that it's crucial from everybody from the front desk to the boardroom. Everybody has to participate. It isn't something that just folks that are, that have email or folks that are just, in the boardroom or executives. Try to avoid it. The jargon, the technical terms, keep it simple. Security awareness and training shouldn't be an annual thing. And again, this is going to come on based on your culture. It should be a monthly thing, or have something each month where they're learning something new or reinforcing something. Working against human nature, again, and also with regards to your culture. And having that healthy culture with examples coming from the top is going to help drive that ideal behavior that you're looking for. But you want to get specific. What behaviors, if adopted, are going to be the most beneficial for your organization? We're going to focus on phishing. We're going to focus on making sure people aren't tailgating. We're going to make sure people are classifying data or shredding data, disposing of it. What are those different behaviors that we're going to focus on, whether that's quarterly, annually, and then is the behavior something you can take on? Again, we don't want to be trying to boil the ocean with all this, but we certainly want to look at whatever those key items are and go from there. Finally, does anybody know why PowerPoint crossed the road? Yeah, to get to the other slide. So, all right, wrap this up here. I know this is what it feels like some days, and I love this picture from the Suez Canal with the tanker that got stuck last year. That little digger doing it. Trying to dig out get the dirt out so that they can free the big giant ship. And a lot of the time, that's what it feels like. It's a security team, it's an IT team trying to get this culture, trying to get that pushed out. You've got the large organization, and some days it's just one bite at a time. One of my favorite jokes is, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And that's kind of the same thing that we're applying here. But the thing to keep in mind is it's about getting the workers to value security, but where they're proactively participating in the steps that are going to reduce that risk within your organization overall. And that comes from my good friend, Perry Carpenter, one of his quotes that he has. But it's where we want those secure behaviors, but we also want people to be able to be proactively getting involved. That's kind of our end result overall. So finally, humans are the de facto choice for cyber criminals, plain and simple. We know it's a lot easier to hack a human than it is to hack a firewall, and it's still the top attack vector along with unpatched systems. A lot of the time we need to get more attention towards the security awareness, developing that strong security culture. Overall, in studies that we've seen, 50% of the money goes towards networking. There's about 20% that goes to The endpoint systems, you got about 15% each that goes towards web applications, identity access management, which leaves about, if I did my math right, it leaves about 3% left for the human. And when we're seeing the humans being attacked the most, but they're not getting any significant amount of money to grow that culture, that becomes a problem. Doing the frequent simulated social engineering, phishing assessments, having a strong cybersecurity culture in your organization, that's an investment because it's going to help protect your organization overall. And the failure to invest can be a failure to the reputation and of the senior management overall with regards to reputation, to brand, because of those attacks and everything else. Finally, I'm just really curious if anybody knows what a computer and an air conditioner have in common. Yeah, they're both useless when you open Windows. So there's one for all my Mac friends that are out there. I want to appreciate the time that you've spent listening, hopefully been able to take away some key items. And I think we might have time for some questions.
Absolutely, we do. Great presentation. I love the jokes, James. Thanks so much. We do have some questions for you coming in. While we take those questions, I'm just going to bring up this poll for everyone out there that says, what additional information would you like about KnowBe4? And we got a ton of great questions coming in. I love all these questions. Ben said he loves the dad jokes. Fatine said loves the jokes. Yeah, this morning. So let's see. First question I wanted to ask you is around what's the best way to get security culture set up within the organization? Any recommendations there?
First and foremost, it's got to come from the top. You've got to have their buy-in, and you've got to get them being able to, demonstrate that culture and those actions and having those discussions. A lot of the time, if it's coming down from the top, then getting in with the department meetings. When I used to visit power plants, at the beginning of every day, people would be in the staff room and they'd be kind of going over, okay, this is what's happening today, any outages coming out. But then they would have a health and safety tip. Okay, it's this time of the year where it's snowy. Everybody watch the black ice, the snow that's out there. Take extra care. The same thing could apply from a cybersecurity standpoint. Have that cybersecurity tip. Okay, we're always seeing, the phishing attacks coming in. Make sure we're checking those links on a daily basis. Or, if it's your time to start creating a strong password, this is why you want a unique password or the implementation of a new password manager. But certainly getting it coming down from the top and trying to get it integrated into meetings is another good way too as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wise advice. I like that. Let's see. Another question here. They want to know how many times before someone clicks a link before we can terminate their employment? I like that one. What do you think?
That is a good question. And that is a common one we see a lot. And I'm going to go back to, it depends on your culture, and also your policies. This is another one of these things that a lot of folks don't realize is you need to have a policy. You have a policy with regards to, other actions that people take with an organization. You need to have one now with regards to your phishing assessments. Are you going to terminate them after the first one? No, I would hope not. But, you have a process that you go through. Okay, if you click on the link, one of our phishing assessments, you get the 15-minute refresher training, got to take the quiz. Do it again within 30 days. Okay, then you've got to take the refresher training again, and then we might bring in your manager and have a conversation. If you get up to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times and it's been within a year, you want to set those time frames and that frequency. Then you start looking at, okay, you're not taking the security of our organization, this culture, seriously enough. You're, in essence, what you're doing is opening up the front door for every person that walks up and letting them walk into the company and walk around. So if they're not getting it, maybe then that's the time to separate and go their different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. They're wanting to know here, how do we get leadership to support a strong security culture? Any advice there?
Bribes and drinks. No, I'm kidding. A lot of it, and this is it with any conversation you have with leadership, it's talking in their language. What is it that's most important to the leadership? If you're a publicly traded company, it's about the stock. If we end up having a data breach in our organization, this is going to be the impact. And we always say that we take security seriously. But what is the risk that you're willing to take? Because a lot of the times executives and upper management are willing to take on a lot more of a risk appetite than what we think we would normally do. And so it's a matter of having to explain it to them, make sure that there's an understanding of the risk that, with regards to the phishing assessments. If we've got 1 in every 3 people clicking on a phishing link, and that's 1 in 3, that's that many opportunities that cyber criminals can get into our organization, steal our intellectual property, steal all of our employee records, extort that ransom, extort us for the money, and in which case then we're on the front page news, kind of like a certain football team from last weekend.
Okay, I like that.
And I'm not talking about the Rams, unfortunately.
Right. Let's see. I'm afraid that's all the time we have in our live Q&A here, but I see 30 more questions for you there in the electronic queue. Maybe you can get back to some of those folks, James. It's always a pleasure having you on. Love the content and the jokes as well.
My pleasure.
All right. For more information on KnowBe4, I encourage everyone to fill out the poll question there. We do want to get your feedback, and also don't forget about the handouts tab. It's there that you'll find a link to the KnowBe4 site on how to start your free phishing security test. That's a quick form you can sign up and start your free phishing test right there at knowbe4.com. All right, I'll leave the poll question up while I announce our next prize winner. Here we go. First, Amazon $500 prize winner is Floranti Santos from Virginia. Congratulations, Floranti Santos from Virginia. We've still got 2 more $500 gift cards to give out after the event, and of course, don't forget about our best question prizes that we're running as well. Thank you to everyone who responded here to the poll question. We do appreciate your feedback. I'm excited now to welcome Chris Weyman, Manager for Global Sales Engineering at Sophos. Chris, are you there?
Yes, thanks for having me today.
It's great to have you on, Chris. Take it away.
Perfect. Well, thank you. I hope this session is helpful for somebody asking the best question. So please, as this comes through, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Today, I want to talk about how event correlation is not threat hunting. And really, I just like that I got to use a not equal sign in my presentation. But more importantly, I want to talk about why it matters. I think at first glance, this might look a little bit pedantic, especially people that have been working in the industry for a while. But I think now more than ever, as we are talking increasingly about things like XDR and advanced threats, and just kind of this was the year 2021, I would contend that cyber threats kind of entered the zeitgeist or the common cultural consciousness. Understanding and having these conversations is more relevant than it's ever been. But really, I want to take a step back and start with one of my favorite new quotes a team member of mine brought up, and I think it frames this conversation quite nicely. It used to be the tagline, might still be on one of Sam's forensics courses, but it's the idea that malware can hide, but it must run. And if you're a defender, this is essentially what your life is, right? And I would contend here, let's define malware not as just a piece of bad code, but it could be adversary tactics. It could be somebody that's in your environment. It could be a threat actor that's gained some sort of persistence. Their goal is really to hide, but also to do the things that they want to do in a victim environment. So to get exfiltration going, to ultimately run the ransomware, maybe do a little bit of both. This is, I think, I've been chewing on this for a while, and I think this really sums up where we're starting today. And I think, again, maybe a good place to start with this is just some operant definitions. So event correlation, when we talk event correlation today for the purposes of our conversation, I want you to think of it more as a passive form of defending, okay? Still very relevant. I don't mean to disparage or make it kind of this hierarchical thing that you do in your environment for security outcomes. But I think event correlation as a passive means of defense or a jumping off point makes a lot of sense, because the whole idea is that you've got systems in place in your environment to bring together events and hopefully unify them into something that looks like a case that you can, hopefully jump off and find related indicators of compromise or indicators of attack. Generally, this is done with some sort of threat intelligence, be it provided from your vendor, or maybe you're bringing in third-party intel into some event correlation platform. Ultimately, it is kind of just bubbling things up for you based on a preset system or preset algorithms that might be either out of the box or you've built in. Very passive in that you consume it, which is, I think, then ties into threat hunting. And in a good system, I won't bury the lead here, event correlation and threat hunting are so, there's such a cycle of continuous improvement on these that they're kind of inextricably linked. But threat hunting, conversely, is more defined as proactive hunting, right? Like, at the risk of using a definition, the words in the definition, I guess I should say, this is hunting threats. This really is the use of your expertise or intuition to go through and find indicators of attack or indicators of compromise that honestly you probably couldn't find with your event correlation engines, or you couldn't dig through until you've done more kind of investigation into this. So TLDR is event correlation, passive threat hunting, proactive investigation. And again, just to kind of set the framework of what we're talking about today, I hope everybody's seen at least the top one, the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain, everybody's favorite in the industry. I think it really, along with attack and MITRE's framework there, gives us a common vernacular. The reason we use this, and especially where it's helpful, what we're talking about today, to understand event correlation is not threat hunting, is to understand the types of things that you're looking for in both cases. So in event correlation, you may actually get an event anywhere along the kill chain. What you don't get, especially in a linear version of the kill chain, like the top one, is really the idea of adversary tactics that may not be positively convictable or even identifiable with an automated detection until you've built it. So that's where I love the unified kill chain, which is the bottom version. I think it really brings a lot of clarity to what we're seeing in adversary tactics today, which is it's not purely linear. It's not serial a lot of times. It's not, there is one step A, one step B, one step C. You see threat actors oftentimes iterating through various points in the kill chain multiple times. And so you as a defender are looking for the signals that correspond to this. Execution is a great example. If you look at that middle loop there, you might see multiple detections or multiple alerts in your event correlation engine that clue you off to there's multiple things going on here. But until you've done the threat hunting behind it to really investigate what's the scope, and we'll talk about exposure windows here in just a minute, your events are not telling you the full story. So your events are a great trailhead. They kind of kick you off into, running something down and fully understanding the scope of what's happening. But I love to orient around really the unified kill chain, because it can help you understand when we see multiple methods of persistence, sometimes as many as 7 or 10 or a couple dozen, it helps you see that threat actors are iterating. They're going through these loops similar to how your threat hunting methodology should be structured. And then the last piece of, I guess, framing here that goes into those is affectionately called the pyramid of pain, if you haven't seen this before. But really what it is just to illustrate the point of the signals that you're actually collecting. So I bring this up because in event correlation and threat hunting, you're going to see all of these things. The reality is your event correlation engines are really good at doing the bottom, call it third or 2/3 of this pyramid. And if it's done properly, it actually weeds out a ton of noise for you as a threat hunter. It acts as that low pass filter. The other side of that is if you don't have some sort of filtering on those events that are coming in, it makes your job as a threat hunter really, really hard. And I think that that's where kind of this misconception I get when I talk to a lot of people that misconstrue or conflate threat hunting with event correlation. A lot of times it's because their correlation engines it's just so much noise. You have to weed through a lot of things. So your events, when you think about things like hash values or IP addresses, a great example of this, I built this deck before Friday, but on Friday, the FBI released a advisory for Blackbyte ransomware. So if you've ever seen these, this is not a new thing, but there is TCPs and hashes and directories and all kinds of stuff in that. There's a list of a ton of hashes. So you could take that and feed that into your event correlation engine as a pretty trivial thing. You might be looking for detections on those or that running in your environment. And then from there, you as a threat hunter are taking that event to actually go understand the scope of the compromise or potential compromise. Same thing for things like directories. There was stuff in Exchange in that advisory that showed Black Byte is using unpatched Exchange potentially, dropping web shells, all kinds of stuff. And you can see in the relative point at which you grab that signal in the pyramid, I think illustrates which part of your solution stack should actually be catching this. So as a threat hunter, my hope for you is that you've got a good event correlation engine behind you so that you can spend your time dealing with the top third, the tools and the TTPs or tactics, techniques, and procedures that the adversaries are using, because those are the things that your correlation engines are not able to really give you high confidence or high fidelity info about unless you validate it or you fed it in, which is a really verbose way of just saying, if you're running down a bunch of things like PowerShell executions, if you haven't taught or your engines don't really know how to articulate legitimate PowerShell versus illegitimate PowerShell, you're going to spend your whole day digging through, stuff that turns out to not be very malicious. So that's one example. If we look at that Black Byte advisory, if you're in critical infrastructure, please go take a look at it. I think it'll be really illustrative of what we're talking about today. The other one that I wanted to talk about, as promised kind of in the description of this presentation, is actually a Log4j attack. So Log4j, for those of you that just need a real quick catch up, it's a logging engine behind Java that has been known to be massively exploitable. Everybody thought the world was kind of ending when this happened, and it turns out that there's a lot less exploitation of Log4j instances than we thought there was going to be. That's not to say there's none, though. So this is only a couple weeks old. In the UK, the National Health Services released this great, I think, image of what this attack looks like. And what it boils down to is, I think, a really good reference point to understand where event correlation and threat hunting need to come into play. And I'll say this because event correlation on the front end was likely not going to catch this attack as kind of a new and emerging attack. Everybody knew that Log4j was vulnerable, and you may have known that your instance of Horizon, in this case from VMware, was vulnerable. But until you started seeing remote code execution against it, with PowerShell getting spawned out of a Tomcat service and trying to drop a web shell and deploying a listener, everything that's in that graphic there, really, to catch this on the front end, you needed to have a threat hunter that was actually able to look through and understand illegitimate uses of PowerShell spawning from Tomcat. Now, where this interplay really comes into play here is, as a threat hunter, you identified that PowerShell. You could then go right into your event correlation, your SIM, or your, whatever your endpoint software or whatever it might be. You could identify those things now because you've seen those TTPs. But if and until your vendor does an update or creates a blocking action for things like a web shell getting dropped on this specific tactic, you're left to your own devices where your event correlation engine is going to be somewhat silent on this. And this is really just an illustrative, recent, ripped from the headlines version of this. We saw this in Proxy Shell. We saw this earlier on last year, Proxy Logon, Kaseya, all kinds of attacks that we saw last year, where if you're waiting for an event to clue you off to some attack that's happening, if it's an emerging attack, you're going to be largely left unaware until the industry catches up with protections and things, which happens fairly rapidly. But you're still left asking a couple of questions. So I'm actually going to skip ahead here just a touch. And I think it makes more sense to talk about exposure windows out of this. So if we look at something like where you've got this VMware Horizon Log4j, it's actually a Log4Shell exploitation, you know that you've got a vulnerable instance. So you're going to go patch, which is great. And at this point, your protection mechanisms have blocking events to show you that things are happening in your environment, that the attack has been stopped. Now, I'll tell you, one of the other just really practical pieces of advice that I can give everybody here is those detection events that something is getting stopped in your environment generally only stop for a couple of reasons. You're going to see those events recurring in whatever platform you're using until the attacker moves on, gets bored, maybe it was a one-time attack, or they've gotten through and they found a way around that actually didn't detect on that anymore, because nothing is 100%. So patching alone is great because you've closed the potential for the adversary to actually continue to exploit that. But understanding an exposure window, and if this is the first time you're seeing that, that's really the time that you're exposed and the subsequent investigation that you need to do to understand if there's further compromise or misuse or persistence here. So let's go back to that Horizon and Log4j instance here. Today, we know we see blocking events on that a lot. But I've also seen where that has turned into ransomware or coin miners or various different things. So if you're someone that sees that as an example, you're going to patch first. You're going to then go take the events that show that you've been blocking, right, coming from that correlation engine, and you use that as the starting point for your threat hunting. So that's really that post-red point there, investigation. You're going to go look for evidence of maybe different web shells or different persistence mechanisms, like they've installed TeamViewer or ngrok or any number of applications that might have actually gotten in. Maybe you're looking for anomalous use of admin tools in your environment. That's really where we get to with understanding your event correlation is not your threat hunting. This is a really great example because your events are just showing you, telling you something has happened. Until you've hunted it down, your exposure window is just kind of ongoing. So I want to take a step back then, knowing that we use something like Log4j as an example of that. Here are three, I guess, places that we can start with attackers evolving their techniques. So we've talked about things like zero days or new and emerging attacks. Another big one here that's going to really illustrate the difference between your event correlation and your threat hunting is gaps in coverage. And by that I mean undeployed assets, underdeployed, underprotected assets, and also in your event correlation, data streams that you haven't tuned or pulled in. So this is information that you're just completely unaware of. As we all know, there was a ton of webinars on work from home. One of the main things everybody was worried about is you have a distributed edge now. There's no main firewall. How do you monitor network traffic for things like anomalies? As people are coming back into offices more, you've now got things that we haven't worried about for a couple of years, like guest devices that are potential vectors that you have no real telemetry on other than maybe coming from your edge or network monitoring. So understanding where your gaps in coverage are can be a really great place for you to look at threat hunting as a need and then building in the results of your hunts into your event correlation. Things like scanning exclusions, I would throw data feeds that you don't have coming into your SIM or your event correlation in there, but also in your protection mechanisms, what have you wholesale excluded from stopping this kind of stuff? So things like pskill, psexec, gmer, things that might be totally legitimate, especially in your business, knowing where you've got potential gaps because you've left mechanisms that adversaries like to take advantage of. And if they've been excluded, that data may actually not make it into your event correlation engine. You may need to hunt on that as a hypothesis. And then the last one here is evasion of EDR. I think this kind of fits into the previous two, or XDR if you're using multiple different products pulled in here. Understanding things like living off the land and legitimate admin credentials being used illegitimately, things that we hear about all the time. These are, I guess, three really easy ways to conceptualize some of the hunts that we're doing, especially around tactics that we see. So the last place I want to end with this is actually in broadly how we see a threat hunting process and where this actually serves to enrich your event correlation. So I'm not going to start at the top. Let's actually start on the left-hand side. Everything you do out of a threat hunt should be built back into your either protection or your event correlation. All of the output that you get from that, every answer, be it a valid threat or be it a hunt that validated that you don't have anything further to verify, the information that you gather should be going back into automated detections to make you more efficient as a threat hunter. If you look at how that happens, again, we look at that Horizon example, your hypothesis is that you've gotten a blocking event to show that a web shell was attempted to be dropped or that exploit was attempted to be used. Going and acquiring the data across your estate to say, do I have any other Horizon instances? What credentials could have been used on there? I need to go look at baselines of my environment, understanding what's going on. And then I'm going to analyze that data and decide if I need to further continue the loop by informing and enriching it. So, especially because Horizon is a desktop as a service kind of, or, VDI program, you have a ton of IP addresses that you might need to go validate. Are these my home user IPs? Are they coming from places that I expect? Are they coming from places that are completely anomalous? And so you go and enrich that with other information. Maybe you try to understand things like IP abuse. Are they known bad IP addresses that are kind of popping up in different places? And then you may very well need to go propose a new hypothesis that says, I think someone has actually compromised this. I need to go gather more data. So you work through all of this until you can get to that point of output. But, that's the, I guess, quick and summary of what we're doing with event correlation versus threat hunting is understanding that it's not an either or situation. And if you're in a position where you're relying on either one, without event correlation, your threat hunting team is probably investigating things that you could tune out to give them higher fidelity signals. And if you're not doing any kind of threat hunting off of the alerts and events that you're getting out of your systems, you're not closing your exposure window properly to make sure that you don't have a bigger problem at hand. So that's the, I guess, quick run through of conceptually how we're thinking about event correlation not being threat hunting, why it matters, and I think we've got a little bit of time for some questions here.
Absolutely. Yeah, we sure do. Great presentation, Chris. We do have questions. And while we take those, I'm just going to bring up this poll for everyone out there that says, what additional information would you like about Sophos? So let's see, lots of good questions coming in. I guess I'll just start with this one. Pratik, I believe is how you pronounce it, said he's very fond of Sophos, and his question is around zero-day attacks. He said, I know these are always going to be challenging. How do you recommend, from a policy or governance perspective, looking at things regarding zero-day attacks?
Yeah, last year was a rough year for 0 days first, so I'm glad you're asking this question because it means you're taking this into account. I think knowing that 0 day means, by virtue of it being a 0 day, that it's likely there's not a patch for this, right? So you may be able to catch it with some protection mechanism down the stack, but a 0 day, things like proxy shell, is coming from legitimate vulnerabilities. For all intents and purposes, it's a feature of a software that you're using. So from a governance perspective, knowing what you're using is the first probably hurdle there. And then the second hurdle is, what do you do when you see a notification for a 0 day in a platform that you're using or software that you're using? So knowing who to call, knowing what your kind of IR plan might be out of those types of things, because they're not going away. So it's a great, I think, first question to say, what do we have? Where do we go? And then from that, how do we mitigate it? How do we properly hunt on that? Who's doing that hunting consistently? And proxy shell was a great example of this, as was, Horizon Log4j.
Okay, excellent. And then here's another good question they're asking about. Bob wants to know, do you have any strategies for mid-sized organizations for developing a comprehensive endpoint protection with limited resources?
Yeah, this is a great question because I think a lot of times people see advanced threat hunting and they assume that I can't get all the way there, so I can't really start somewhere. So I would say start working on upskilling and up-leveling and giving yourself the tools that you need, but also know that there are resources outside of just building tools and doing it yourself. So the whole MDR market is indicative of that. We have MTR, which is one of those things that's purpose-built for that. But I would say twofold. If you're really resource constrained and you've only got a couple people that are so taxed already, look at what other solutions you can augment with what you're doing. And the other side is, if you've got people that are doing this, be aware that you don't have to do all the obscure threat hunting to really be effective. You can, it's a continuum. You can be on that journey to understanding more and more of the techniques while continuing to find things all along the way, kind of in the beginning. So those would be my two, I guess, pieces of advice.
Okay, good advice. And then here's an interesting question they're asking, what are the needed skills to be a successful threat hunter?
I am a big fan of threat-informed defense. This is a MITRE term. I really do think that understanding the way that adversaries take advantage of environments, understanding how they dump LSAS and memory and grab, passwords out of memory can really help you understand what you're looking for in a threat hunt. So I'm a big fan of platforms that actually can help you upskill in that way to really get a grasp on how adversaries are taking advantage of our environments. And then the other skill I would say is just curiosity. So go read as much as you can. Go look at things like Twitter. Go look at, curate your news feeds so you're getting things like these advisories from CISA or the FBI or NCSC or, various organizations across the world so that you know the kinds of things you can go start to look for in your environment.
Okay. Good advice. And then another question here, they're asking, does the distinction between event correlation and threat hunting really even matter?
Yeah, that's what I said at the beginning. It's a little, you could perceive it as a little bit pedantic, but I think understanding one's more passive than the other, absolutely. So event correlation leaves a lot of questions unanswered, especially in regards to something like your exposure window. If you haven't investigated everything else around those events, you can't definitively say that something is or isn't going on, something bigger isn't going on. So I would contend event correlation oftentimes is that entry point into a threat hunt, a great threat hunt, starting with a good trailhead. But absolutely, it can make a difference between a full-on incident or validating that you don't have an incident. And in both cases, I would argue that they're both very important because they both dictate if you need to do something bigger or not.
Okay, good. And then, so this person wants to know, once you have findings from a threat hunt, what's your next step after that? Where do you go?
Yeah, so you can, if you go back to something like the pyramid of pain, you've probably got hashes, IP addresses, maybe registry keys, could be auto runs, things that you're looking for that are IOCs. You can go build those in as either blocking. So in the case of like IP addresses or hashes, you can go build those as blocking events, prohibit them in your environment to make sure that they're not running anywhere else. And then for all of the other stuff that you've got, understanding that you may want to set up better monitoring in there. It may be something that you want to keep an eye on. But that's what I mean when you take your kind of threat hunt findings and feed that back into your event correlation so that you don't have to do that hunting again in the same way. You may have to hunt in the same place again for some other threat, but ideally you'd like to take those findings and automate as much of that into your event correlation as you can.
Excellent. All right. Well, Chris, I'm afraid that's all the time we have here in our live Q&A. There's a ton more questions for you. They're still in the electronic queue. Maybe you can get back to some of those folks, but a great presentation. I learned a lot. I know the audience did as well. Thank you for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And I encourage everyone to check out the handout that's there in your audience console. I posted a link to it as well in the questions pane, but it's right there in the handouts tab. Really for the whole event. It's entitled 4 Key Tips from Incident Response Experts. So make sure that you check that out. It's a really nicely done resource. You can download it and check it out or share it after the event. All right, so thank you to everyone who responded there to the poll question. Let's keep the EcoCast moving here. And I'm excited now to bring in our next presenter. Welcome, Shane Rose, Security Engineer at Huntress. Shane, are you there?
I am.
Thanks for being on, Shane.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Good to have you.
Oh, thanks.
Yes, sir. Yeah, take it away.
All right, great. So thanks for the time, everyone, to sit down and chat with me for a little bit about Huntress. I'm going to advance the slide here. So Huntress was really founded about 6 years ago by 3 guys. They used to work at the NSA for about 10 years. And so they were basically cyber warfare operatives for the federal government. So their day-to-day was really, they were specialized in infiltrating adversaries' networks, remaining hidden, collecting intelligence, for sometimes months, sometimes years, right? And so over that 10 years of time, they really realized that doing so was actually rather trivial if you had that skill set, right? And since then, a lot of those same tactics that they were using have leaked out. A lot of these ransomware groups are using the very similar skill sets today. And the idea of Huntress was kind of born to develop a product to counter that type of activity from the perspective of an offensive hacker, right? We don't necessarily need to boil the ocean or collect all the logs, right, to be effective at detecting these types of behaviors. And so how do we build a tool that is affordable, but also scalable really for the 99% of companies out there, right, that don't have unlimited budgets to spend on security? And so that's really what Huntress is about. That's what we do. That's kind of what we're passionate about day to day. And so we'll jump in here and we'll talk a little bit about the NIST cybersecurity framework, just to kind of level set you guys on where we fit, right? And so this is a good example of really the 5 layers that NIST has put together here for basically for a good security or mature security stack, right? And sorry, the slides got a little wonky here, but that first one is identify. So you've got identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, right? And so we as Huntress really fit into that detect and respond piece. But ideally, if you're a company who has unlimited budgets, right, you can do all of these things that you see here on the slide. Unfortunately, for most of us, we don't have unlimited budgets. And so as we talk to customers, what we normally see is something more like this, right? We have some asset management there to know really what machines are out there on the network. They have a lot of, most of that budget is going into protect, right? Where you've got your AV, your next gen AV, firewall, DNS filtering, email filtering, phishing training, and then in recovery, some sort of backup solution. Detect and respond is generally, the budgets aren't spent there, and it's really, it's a more difficult place to play because it actually requires security expertise. If you really don't know what you're looking for, detect and respond is difficult, right? There's some of that you can augment with software, and we as a product augment some of the detections with software. But at the end of the day, you really have to have that knowledge for threat hunting and be trained for that to really be effective here. There's a lot of products out there that, like EDRs, that feed a lot of data into customers. But if the customer doesn't have people designed or trained to really deal with that data, understand it, interpret it, it's really not that effective for them, right? And so how do we fill that gap, right? There's a huge shortage in those people that are trained, right, in security. And so really that's what Huntress is about, is helping you guys to fill that detect and respond gap in the security stack. And so as we do that, as you move from left to right here across the NIST cybersecurity framework, ultimately, as you move across, right, if there's a compromise, if someone gets past your preventative and your protective layers, those tools, right, you're kind of move into detect and respond and recover. And so in detect and respond, you become less reliant on technology, more reliant on people, right? Like I said, detect, it's easy enough to write some software to help you augment your detection phase. But, that respond phase is actually pretty difficult for software to handle, right? You have to understand, you have to have analysis, you have to understand what that attacker has done to understand how to develop remediation instructions or a run book, right, to remediate that stuff. And especially once you get over to recover, we don't play there, but obviously if you're going to restore your network, you need people involved there. So we are there playing in that detect and respond, and we're mainly focused on persistence currently today, and the product is expanding. But the thought and the philosophy at Huntress is, realistically, these bad actors, what they want to do is get into your systems and dwell for 90 to 100 days, right? They want to do that specifically because they want to beat your backup cycles. Most companies' backup cycles are less than 90 days. So they know if they can remain undetected for that long, they've basically made it within your backup cycle. If you tried to restore to get rid of them, they're just, that backdoor, that element of persistence is still there. So what they want to do is remain undetected during that 90 days. They're going to be doing their lateral movement. They're going to be looking for things. They're going to be looking for that interesting data to exfiltrate. And eventually at the very end, they may pop some sort of ransomware. They generally do that today just to be obnoxious, just to cause, cause a commotion, and just it's a diversionary tactic for them. They've already exfiltrated data. They know they can sell that data to random people on the dark web. So they do have multiple revenue streams there. They're not really relying necessarily on a customer, an end customer paying that ransom anymore. They have these other ways to make money during this process. But the idea being that if you look at MITRE, and MITRE is really just the anatomy of an attack, right? And so it's an attack chain, and it moves left to right. This entire slide is a bit of an eye chart, but really the things to remember are just right there, that top row, right? Those are the attack vectors. They're going to start with initial access. They're going to move into execution, right? Your preventative tools are really there and designed in that protect layer to deal with those kind of threats. But eventually someone's going to get past those threats. They're going to send some sort of phishing email. Someone's going to click on it. It's going to be allowed to run potentially. And as soon as that happens, they're going to attempt to set up some sort of persistence, right? They do that because they want to be able to come and go at will. So they want that back door, right? They want it set up so that they can come and go without you being aware. They need to do that to survive a reboot so that they don't have to re-break into the environment every day, right? When people go home at night or they reboot that machine, they don't want to get kicked out. They want that persistence to still be there. So if you actually focus on persistence, which is a big part of what our product does, you can actually break that chain there at persistence, right? If we can identify persistence and remove it from the environment, a lot of the rest of the attack chain becomes very difficult for them, right? They're going to have to reset, they're going to have to roll back in, reestablish persistence, and then move right again in that attack chain. So if we can kind of break that chain, they typically will just say, oh, well, this isn't low-hanging fruit. I've got a lot of other opportunity out there that I can go find that don't have something like Huntress in the mix. They're doing that threat hunting for us and removing persistence. So that's kind of our philosophy. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and go into a dashboard demo just so I'll walk through exactly how the product works, exactly what the dashboard looks like for you guys. So this is our dashboard, and it starts with an agent, right? We deploy that agent via many different methods. We can have SACM deployments, GPO deployments. If you have an RMM tool, we could use that. You could use PDQ deploy. We have instructions. We have scripting already pre-built for most of that. So easy to deploy. There's really no tuning of the agent once it's out there. It's very small. The end users don't know it's there. It doesn't even require a reboot to get started, right? Once it's there, it's going to check back in with us every 15 minutes. We'll see it in the dashboard. And it's basically going to start collecting data on these auto-starting pieces of Windows because, again, that's really where the attacker has to establish that persistence. They're going to actually try to affix it to one of these auto-starting processes. They can be services. They can be scheduled tasks, anything that automatically starts when Windows starts. And, by default, Windows 10 box, typically you're looking at 800 to 1,000 of these, just depending upon how much third-party software is there. So way more things here than actually Windows will show you in that startup folder, right? But it's still a finite amount of things, and we know that they have to establish persistence here. And so it is an effective place for us to hunt and to be scalable. And so we're going to collect that data about every 15 minutes. If there's any one change, we're going to resend that entire data set up. And the process from there, basically that data gets to our cloud. We go through a software layer. And once that happens, it will eventually, if there's something we haven't seen before, or if it's a malicious thing that we have seen before, it's going to prompt an investigation. And those are actually displayed here on the main screen. And we'll take a look at an example of one here first that is a non-malicious one. Now, this is something we wouldn't notify you on because we're really striving to be a non-noisy solution. We're going to do a lot of investigations with our threat ops team of people so that you guys don't have to do that, report back to you when you actually need to take action, right? So part of that investigation is our software takes a look at a persistence mechanism or how it's remaining persistent and the binary, which is just basically the fingerprint of the file. So in this case, the defender probably updated, the binary changed a bit, it prompted its investigation. Kat she's over on our threat ops team, and so is Kenneth. They did an investigation. They found that, hey, this is the expected, it's launching a known persistence mechanism, expected binary, it's digitally signed with the Microsoft Corp certificate, right? So everything checks out there. they're going to reclassify this as reputable. So from now on, if we see this from any of our other clients, we know, hey, we've already investigated this, and we don't need to take a look at it anymore. That's how we kind of keep this thing scalable and affordable. Incident-wise, if that same process happened and we actually found something malicious, that's when you actually do get some action from us. You get a report, and that report actually comes through the same way. We can integrate with any ticketing system just via an email push, but we also have a few that we can direct integrate with. But the email is going to come through and look exactly like this. There will be a link back to the dashboard. At the very top of this report, we're going to tell you what this is. In this case, it's Cufter, which is a fileless malware. We will tell you what host it's on. Organization and tags are user definable, so you can have multiple organizations under your account if you wanted to break things up that way. You could have tags for specific site names if you wanted. And security products or any other AV or any other security tool that's installed on the machine, we're going to list here so that you can have an idea if the malicious actor had been able to remove something that you expected to be installed there. Below that, we actually have remediation instructions on basically how to manually remediate this element of persistence in the environment. But instead of you having to do that manually, we also have this assisted remediation feature, which really is designed to save you guys a lot of time, in which you're going to click this review remediation plan, click approve here, and you will ultimately task our agent to do these things on your behalf. Once that happens, you kind of get a readout here of the status. You'll get a green check or a red X if we're unable to remediate this. 95% of the time we're able to do these things. Occasionally there'll be a piece that needs some manual intervention there. But again, any of that instructions would be here in the report. And at the very bottom of this report is just an example of the indicators of compromise that we're seeing. And this is kind of a good example of something that we're looking for that, typical software AV solutions may miss, right? We're using a living off the land technique here, using command.exe, which is a command interpreter for Windows. We're passing in a really odd file name with a really odd file type. Windows is going to go in the registry to try to figure out, hey, what application do I have that can open this weird file? Cufter set up a couple links there in the registry that pass it over to launching MSHTA, which is actually an HTML handler in Windows, also has been built in since about Windows 95. It's going to run JavaScript, which it can do. It's an HTML handler, but the key here is it's going to read from the registry from HKey current user software, and these two other keys here are randomized. Every time Cufter installs on a machine. So what it does is actually hide the malicious code in this registry key. Every time the machine boots, it's going through these footholes, launching command.exe, launching MSHTA to then pull this malicious code out of the registry and run it and load it basically right into memory. And they want to do that so they can bypass on-access scanning tools that typical AVs use, right? If they're not actually touching the file system, many times they can bypass an AV scan because those happen on access of a file from the file system, not necessarily pulling something out of a registry key to load directly into memory. So that's just one example of kind of our foothold detection, which is one of the features that we have. They're all kind of down the left side here, the interface, and what we've been talking about here is our footholds. Again, this is one SKU for us. These aren't piecemeal. This is the product. Everything's included. You can use all of these elements, or you can kind of pick and choose, right? Our next feature here is managed antivirus, and that really allows us to control and manage the built-in, Defender that ships with Windows. So if you buy Windows, you've bought a license for Defender, and so that's why we chose to really partner with Defender, because it's there. If you own Windows, you have Defender, and in many cases, customers could be using a third-party AV that they could possibly swap out for Defender, save some budget there, to use, with Huntress to kind of expand their visibility into more of the MITRE ATT&CK framework or more of that NIST cybersecurity framework, right? So we can do your typical things here with Defender. We can hide the UI. We can do our path extension or process exclusions. We can set our scan time, set our signature update times, and then we're going to let you know here if things are healthy or not with a green shield. If things are not healthy, we'll tell you exactly why. You can actually click on that host name. You can get a breakdown of the services that are part of Defender that are running or not running. And then any data down here about detections that you can actually view. The cool thing about us managing Defender is anything that it's detected and not able to handle, that gets bubbled up to our threat ops team of people as well. So that's just more data that they can use in their threat hunting to understand what's going on there in the environment. Going down the left here, we also have canaries. These are basically encryption detectors, right? And so we push these into a hidden folder under the documents folder that's randomized. The folder name is randomized. The actual file name is randomized. So bad actors can't script around these things. If we detect encryption here, that's going to alert our threat ops team as well. They're going to take a look at it, validate it's actually encryption, and then we have some options to actually be able to host isolate that box. If you allow it, if you turn this feature on, the threat ops team can host isolate for you guys if it's in the middle of the night or whatnot, just so you have time to react in the morning and prevent any kind of lateral movement going on. We can do that with canaries. We can also do that with anything the threat ops team deems as worthy of isolation. And you guys can configure some exclusions to that if you don't want a specific server or whatnot to be isolated. And then down here we also have external recon, which basically whatever public IP our agent's talking back to us on, we're going to run that by a site called showdown.io that basically catalogs all open ports on the internet. We have that API relationship, so we're going to run your IP by those guys and return any open ports we see via their database here. And it's just kind of a quick and dirty way for you guys to see open ports to help you understand, hey, was there something open up on the firewall that we forgot to shut down? Maybe you're assimilating another company into your own and you're going through that process and you bring them into the fold and you can kind of see what ports they have open in a way that's pretty quick and efficient. And then we also have some reporting built in to the product, and these can be either quarterly, monthly. These are more like a C-level report that you guys can push up that shows some value on what we're doing, right? And so these are co-brandable. You can put your own company logo at the top, but there'll be, the top of the funnel here is basically things that the software has analyzed, and the bottom three pieces of the funnel are things that may be bubbled up to our threat ops team to review. With some notes here about, hey, what are we seeing global threat-wise out there out in the world today, along with just a breakdown of the different features for your specific environment. So that's kind of the service, the web page here, the dashboard in a nutshell. I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen for a second, and we'll talk a little bit about what's upcoming for Huntress over the course of the year. So we've spoken a bit about how the product works today. Moving forward, the next two big items are really this process insights and network insights. And this slide really shows how we're mapping these features to that NIST cybersecurity framework, right? We have external recon and identify. If we're managing Defender for you, manage antivirus is taking care of that protect layer. And then our footholds, our canaries, and process and network insights are really going to expand that detect and respond phases for us over the course of the year. Process insights is going to allow us to view any running processes and then be able to hunt for things like privilege escalation and the like. Network insights is going to give us data about network traffic, right? And so we'll get net flow type data. We're not doing full packet captures, but source destination IP, port protocol, things like the size of the data. The things that are really important for you when you're actually wanting to do threat hunting. And we'll be able to tie, hey, this network traffic was tied to this specific process that was spawned by this specific user. Maybe it had a parent process of X. Maybe there's a foothold that we're seeing related to all of this. Bundle all that into kind of a timeline type of report. That's where we're headed. Process insights will be available, available on 4/1 of this year. We currently have it rolled out to about 40,000 endpoints, and we're just in the process of scaling it up now. Network insights will be here end of Q2, beginning of Q3. And again, all that is just data that we're continuing to feed to our threat ops team to do that heavy lift, do that threat hunting, take the burden off of you guys so that you guys can do your jobs. And you have plenty going on. There's a lot, unless you're really living in that security space, being effective at detect and respond, again, really takes people who are specially trained for that, right?
And, the next slide here is just us tying this to those minor attack frameworks as well. So, process and network insights are going to give us visibility into privilege escalation, defense evasion, credential access, lateral movement, and command and control. And then as far as our timeline goes, this is, as I mentioned, process insights kind of rolling out now. It'll be generally available by the beginning of Q2, and network insights is later. And we do have some plans to do some managed Windows firewall as well to augment some of that Defender stuff that we're doing. And ideally, once we have process insights in the mix, we will be able to check that EDR checkbox. There's a lot of cybersecurity insurance companies today that are starting to require that if you're going to look for insurance. We've heard a lot from our clients about, hey, can you guys get to the point where you can check this box? We're there as soon as process insights is GA there on 401. We are able to do that. And we're constantly having those conversations with those companies and getting understandings of what they're wanting, what they're looking for, right? So the call to action for us today is really, we have a 21-day free trial. You guys, it's unlimited agents, so you can push it out to your entire organization. Again, deployment is super simple. It takes about 30 minutes. Uninstall, if you guys decide not to move forward, is literally 2 clicks in our dashboard to uninstall everything. So it doesn't hurt to go ahead and push it all out. And so you can go to that huntress.com/trial. There's no credit card required. You just need an email address. You can set up that trial and get it going. And I would encourage you guys to reach out to us, and we can get on a call and go through the product individually with you. And at this point, that's all I've got. We'll just go ahead and get into the questions.
Yeah, great presentation, Shane. We do have a lot of questions for you. I'm just going to bring up this poll for everyone out there while we take those questions that says, what additional information would you like about Huntress Labs? And so also I should point out that there in the handouts tab, everyone will find a link to that trial, huntress.com/trial. You'll find a link right there that you can sign up and try out Huntress for yourself, free 21-day trial. So first question for you, Shane, I see here that came in. They're asking business and corporations who have already automated tools, is threat hunting exercise, is it still valued or needed?
Yeah, it definitely is. There's a lot of things you can do with tools and automation, but there's also things that are the tools are just not going to see, right? The techniques adapt rather quickly. And there's a lot of situations where they're using built-in Windows system processes and things that these tools understand are good processes, and they want to allow them to run, because otherwise they would compromise Windows, right? And so they're going to find those vulnerabilities, and you really need someone looking at that data, looking at behavior, understanding context to really be able to, fully do threat hunting. It's very difficult to completely automate threat hunting. And in our case, we do use software. We do have our detectors. We build our own indicators of compromise and our own detectors based on the threat hunting that we're doing to, make our processes quicker and more scalable. But at the end of the day, we still think it's very important to have human threat hunting involved in your process and in your environment.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Jordan's asking, how does Huntress work in conjunction with other agent-based solutions?
Yeah, we don't have, so our agent is basically there to collect data, send that data, push that data back up to the cloud. So we don't actually interfere with any other agent out there, and it's super lightweight. So we're using, it's about a 10 meg agent, and we're typically 1% or less of the processor. And most of the time that happens in that 15-minute interval when we're doing a survey, looking at things, seeing if anything changed, and then pushing any data up. So we are super lightweight. We were built purposely to be that way, to be non-intrusive and to be run together. Because again, I think ideally you want some multiple tools, right? You want multiple IOCs looking at your environment, different sets of eyes, to really be comprehensive about your security posture.
Okay. Let's see, another question here. They're asking, we just did that one. How do we decide which areas of the attack framework to start with when it comes to threat hunting?
Well, I think that our early philosophy at Huntress was, hey, if we can catch things there's already a lot of tools out there in the market that look for that initial access and code execution, right? That's your firewalls and your AVs of the world. But what we found was there wasn't a lot of tools in detect and respond once somebody made it past that, right? So ideally, that's where we were focused on persistence, because it was the earliest point in the attack chain where there was this biggest gap that we saw, and that's really why we designed the product the way we designed it. Obviously, the earlier in the attack chain you can stop an attack, the better. But the more visibility you have across the entire attack chain, really the more chance you have of catching attacks as they're happening. So I think you can't just really focus on one. I think focusing on and making sure you have visibility into those early stages is good, but you want to have visibility into as many stages of MITRE that you can.
Absolutely, yeah. You really need that visibility across every stage there of the attack framework. Let's see. This one they're asking, is Huntress with process insights equivalent to an EDR?
Yes, so we will be able to check that EDR box, and again, that's really mainly for the cybersecurity questions or the cybersecurity insurance questions we get a lot. As, hey, is your tool qualified as an EDR? Technically, we're an MDR, right? We're managed detection and response today. The process insights is going to give us that running process of visibility. So, which is really what as we've been talking to insurance companies, so like that's really what we want in addition to what you guys are currently doing. So once we're there, and again, that date is 4/1 when that's going to be generally available this year, we will be an EDR or check that box for that purpose. Yes.
Cool. Very nice. And then what about does Huntress check the EDR insurance box?
Yeah, I think that's just what I was talking about. But yes, it will. As soon as Process Insights is out, yeah, we definitely will.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have here in our live Q&A session. There's still a ton more questions there for you, Shane, in the electronic queue. Maybe you can get back to some of those folks. But great presentation. Really enjoyed the demo and the reports and the user interface. It's really cool. So thank you so much for sharing the Huntress solution with us today on the EcoCast.
All right, no problem, guys. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
And I want to remind everyone again, check out the Huntress Labs trial link. It's there in your handouts tab. So check that out before you go. All right, so with that, it's now time to move on to our next presentation on today's EcoCast. I'm excited to introduce Andrew Flint, Lead Product Manager, and Balut Eversavas, Senior Manager for Product Management at Rapid7. Andrew, Balut, are you there?
We are indeed.
Everyone, yes.
Great. Thanks for being on. Take it away.
All right, awesome. Well, hello everyone. This is Balut speaking. I am leading the product management team for vulnerability management, offensive security, and security content at Rapid7. And I have Andrew joining me. Andrew, do you want to say hi?
Yes, so I'm Andrew. I'm a principal product manager at Rapid7. I'm over on the Endpoint team that supports not just Balut's product, but also IDR at Rapid7.
Awesome. So we are actually really excited about this topic. Andrew and I work really closely on endpoint security and vulnerability management applications. So perhaps a little bit of a different perspective for some of the presentations you are hearing today, and we are really looking forward to giving you a really broad perspective of why it's so important to use, endpoint detection and agents for really the preventative step for the vulnerability management, and hopefully we'll get some good questions to have an interactive conversation. So let's start with taking a look at our ever-growing environments and technologies that are constantly being introduced, making the attack surface even more challenging to manage and secure. with technologies in the cloud and the devices from SCADA systems to IoT or medical devices, depending on the business of the organization, getting added to these environments and disappearing boundaries between networks and on-prem traditional networks and the cloud. So all of these new technologies and systems and the ever-growing size of our environments and complexity of our environments make it really challenging for us to stay secure and prevent cybersecurity attacks and threats. So the vulnerability management process allows with really, giving you that preventative measures. So in a nutshell, vulnerability management is the process of identifying, evaluating, treating, and then reporting on security vulnerabilities in your systems and the software that runs on those systems. And the security vulnerabilities obviously refer to the technological weaknesses that allow attackers to compromise a product and the information it holds. So this is an ongoing, a continuous process that needs to be repeated as more systems or assets are added to our networks or our cloud infrastructure, and as new vulnerabilities are discovered and disclosed by the vendors of the software we are running on these systems. So vulnerability and risk management is really important because it really helps you identify vulnerabilities before cyber criminals do. And it helps you mitigate the risks of a data breach and its associated costs and all the reputational damage that it would give to your organization. And it helps you really understand your security posture. What's the overall risk of your systems and overall environment? And what kind of a program you need to put in place to secure that environment? And it really helps you measure the overall effectiveness of the security measures you're taking. And then last but not least, it helps you meet the data protection requirements such as GDPR, PCI, HIPAA. Some of these actually specifically call out vulnerability scanning and assessment, and some of them really just want you to put together measures for hardening your systems and environments. So let's take a little closer look at the cycle, the continuous cycle of really handling and managing vulnerabilities in your environment. The very first step is the visibility. Visibility into all your assets and software, your modern infrastructure, and really having a proper view of where you have potential, assets and systems that may be challenged by, attackers. And these assets include not just the workstations and servers and cloud computing instances. It does include, printers, routers, switches, and all the things that are actually connected to a network within your environment, and the systems or assets that attackers can use to jump from one to the other as they are actually finding and looking for that invaluable asset and information in your environment. The second step is the assessment of those systems against vulnerabilities and misconfigurations. Basically, once you gain visibility into these assets, the enumerated list of all the software and their version is checked against a large database of all vulnerabilities disclosed, and misconfigurations coming from industry mandates such as CIS or DISASTIG, and checking against those. Once you get a list of all your vulnerabilities and misconfigurations, you will see that it's a tremendous amount. Hundreds, thousands, or if not millions of them will be waiting for you to prioritize. There will always be more vulnerabilities to manage than you will have resources. So it's really important for you to focus on the ones that are most impactful or the riskiest ones. things like risk scoring, threat intelligence, attacker perspective, whether certain vulnerabilities or misconfigurations are attacked in the wild. These kind of information helps you make a better decision on what to prioritize, what to remediate first. And then the next obvious step is remediation, either patching and updating those software or removing them or changing the configuration so you don't have that vulnerability. And then you go right back into the beginning of the cycle to reassess once you remediate, to gain more visibility to new assets and new devices joining your networks. So that vicious cycle goes on and on and on. And in this cycle, one thing that's really a key part of that process is the vulnerability scanners or scan engines. So traditionally, they have been the primary way to assess, gain the visibility, discover assets, and then assess those systems in your environment. It starts with scanning the network accessible systems by pinging them or sending them TCP packets, UDP packets. Once they find an asset responding, then they look for open ports. They look for services running on these systems. They try to log into those systems via authentication with credentials and collect detailed information, again, getting access to the file path, the software that is installed on those operating systems, user accounts, the system configuration. So all of that information is then collected so that we can run an assessment of those. And that's the final step, really, the correlation of all that information against all the known vulnerabilities. So this has been at the heart of traditional vulnerability assessment and scanning, but now we have new options, especially given the recent challenges. And for that, I'm actually going to pass it to Andrew and let him talk to us for the remainder of the presentation.
Awesome. Okay, so Balut just talked about scanning, and at one point, that used to be it. Right? Once upon a time in the realms of vulnerability and risk management, the best marketing buzz in the world was agentless. And there were lots of good reasons for that, and Balut touched on some of them, plus the most dreaded of afflictions known as agent fatigue, which I'll come back to. However, over time, it became clear to Rapid7 that agents were a critical piece of the vulnerability and policy compliance puzzle. And we saw that before the pandemic made that crystal clear. So prior to the pandemic, employees would be taking their laptops home for evenings or weekends, but the next morning or on Monday, they'd be back in the office. Their devices would be back on the corporate network and subject to those scans. Even, weekends and business travel and such doesn't really create too much risk from devices being off-prem and not scanned. You could limit that somewhat when they were routinely rescanned when they were back on-prem, until they weren't back on-prem. So what happens to your exposure risk when employees take their laptops home for what we thought might be a few weeks or months, and they don't come back for 2 years? Suddenly, fewer and fewer assets were within the corporate boundaries and available to be scanned, and with every day, that's more risk. As a result, at Rapid7, we saw doubling, tripling, and quadrupling of agent deployments worldwide. And while there are benefits to using the agents versus the scanner and vice versa, it's not a one solution fits all. I'm going to first come back to the hideous one that I talked about, which is agent fatigue. Virus scanners, remote management, patch management, change control. If you can name it, there's probably an agent for it. And while at Rapid7, we can't solve that completely, what we can do for agents is provide a unified agent. So one agent that you deploy once, and it supports the needs of both endpoint detection and response, the EDR, XDR market, as well as vulnerability and misconfiguration assessment. And that not only reduces deployment and management overhead for agents, but it also allows optimization for Rapid7 on the endpoint with shared data that's collected once and used both for VDM and EDR purposes. For example, all solutions at Rapid7 will need to know base information about the operating system, IP addresses, host names, as well as specifics like is it a cloud or a VDI instance. And then the agent can be resource optimized on the endpoint to collect what is needed for VM or EDR separately. For example, real-time reporting of process information for Insight IDR at Rapid7 EDR purposes. and the routine cataloging of software patches, configuration settings, and such for risk assessment. And of course, it has to do all of this nicely. And by that, I mean minimize or hopefully eliminate any end users noticing the agent is running. A number of companies today are already covering the EDR and XDR space and MDR space, we just heard from, which are critically important, I hasten to add. But to make sure we cover a broad endpoint story in the overall set of presentations today, I'm going to stick more to the vulnerability and risk side. And again, vulnerability assessments began with traditional vulnerability scanning for endpoint visibility. But where does it get inside the asset to really benefit customers? And it's definitely not a one solution fits all. So where does scanning have an advantage over agents? Where does agents have an advantage over scanning? Put more simply, what are the best practices for you to ensure your environment, both on-prem infrastructure and remote assets, are completely covered? The Rapid7 Insight Agent is a small application that runs on Windows, Mac, and Linux assets. Agents are a great way to ensure visibility for assets that are never connected to your network, like, say, taking your laptops home during a pandemic. And you might get scans of those assets when they're connected to VPN, but that's really not a good use of your VPN bandwidth when employees are connected to Zoom and are intending to do work. There are also assets that should not or cannot be scanned, or environments where scanning would potentially interfere with networks or network monitoring alerts. And assets that are so transient that they elude even the most aggressive scan schedules, like daily VDIs or very short-lived ephemeral cloud instances. Also, agents are a great way to eliminate challenges with credentials. And we see at Rapid7, credentials are a recurring challenge for our customers. The whole management overhead of keeping credentials up to date and being alerted when they fail or they need to be changed. Luckily, there are solutions for that, like CyberArk, whom we'll be hearing from later today. But agents are a great way for you to reduce your credential headaches. Agents don't, however, do everything. For complete coverage, you want agents and you want scanning. The obvious need for scanning includes coverage for operating systems for which we don't build an agent. For example, AIX. It's a server operating system. It's unlikely to be on a laptop that someone's taking home, so it's perfect for on-prem scanning. And things like network devices and other devices that can't run an independent agent. Also, vulnerability management agents generally, and Insight agents specifically, collect the same data as a scanner with one big exception. Scanners also probe assets externally to determine if ports are open and if anything is listening and responding on those ports. An agent being local to a device cannot do that. It can't bounce out to the network, turn around, come back in and probe the asset it's on. The agent cannot actually break the laws of physics. So a full solution is both. And at Rapid7, the scanner is smart. It sees an agent, it will skip all of the scanning work that it knows the agent is already covering, and just do the remote checks it knows the agent can't do. So you get the full coverage across all of your assets for everything you need to know with the least amount of network and resource utilization. Now, one of the big challenges people have with agents, part of the reason we have agent fatigue, is managing all of those agents. So we've designed the Insight agent for vulnerability management to be low impact and essentially set and forget. There's a monitoring process that can keep them updated, roll them back to a last good state if something goes wrong. However, in all honesty, it's never quite that simple. Corporate environments especially are never quite that simple. So automatic updates are well and good until you meet corporate policies for software change management. And some companies have restrictions that say you can only update software once a month or once a quarter. So we've built a system that allows you to stage your agent rollouts, test them on a few instances before rolling them out across the entire organization. Also, with that monthly or quarterly change management means that it means that we have been working on an agent version that doesn't require a new software update to get all of the new vulnerability checks. The agent collects all of the data that should be necessary to support brand new CVEs, brand new risks, brand new vulnerabilities. Not always, I'll admit. Log4j, which I'm sure everyone is tired of hearing about, was a very special case because it can be present anywhere in your devices. And that's a rare case. So we had to build specific agent tooling to support that. But almost all new detections are immediately supported in your environment without having to roll out a agent software update. Effortless fleet management also means dashboards and UI views into your agents, their health, and everything you need to know in the environment to make sure that everything is working perfectly. And if not, that all the information necessary is there to correct any anomalies either by customers themselves or in the worst case where support has to get called in or there's a real agent issue that needs to be dealt with. The main point is that it should be seamless to manage your VM coverage even as your corporate infrastructure continues to grow and adopt. So before we go to questions, just one last thing. Balut mentioned policy assessment. So just a short moment on this last topic. Policy and compliance. It's the one area that doesn't necessarily get all the love and attention it deserves when you're talking about risk management. Many organizations are also accountable for compliance to various security policies and standards. We ease that process by providing pre-built checks for common compliance requirements with clear and actionable steps to maintain compliance, and a completely customizable framework to modify existing benchmarks and create new policies from scratch that meet the needs of very unique environments. And this is extra important when you start talking about assets that leave the corporate environment. And you need to know that those remote assets adhere to set policies and configurations that limit your risk and exposure. And you need to know that your assets in the field are adhering to common compliance and or data protection requirements such as CIS, HIPAA, PCI, GDPR. It's one of the more important pieces when an asset is leaving the corporate environment. Now, both Balut and I covered a lot very quickly, but just before we go to Q&A, just a quick wrap up on vulnerability and risk management. You'll hear a lot of presentations today going anywhere from ransomware to EDR to virus scanning to MDR, etc. And vulnerability management provides a great base to support all of those. If you can ensure that your assets are fully patched and up to date and as secure as possible, you can start to limit some of the needs you'll need for hunting down incidences or breaches. So with that, pass it over to Q&A.
Great presentation. Yeah, we do have some questions for you. And while we do that, I'm just going to bring up our poll that we have after each session for everyone out there that says, what additional information would you like about the Rapid7 solution? And we want to get your feedback on that. So lots of great questions coming in. It's kind of hard to know where to start here. I'll go ahead and just start with this one. They're asking, how fast can you confirm remediations? Any advice on that?
Yes. Balut, did you want me to take that?
Sure, go for it.
All right. So you've remediated your assets, or you hope you have, and you want to check those immediately. You can actually do that very, very quickly. And you can do that currently through the scanner, tell it which assets to check for and which exact vulnerability checks to ensure that they have been remediated. That capability is coming in the agent, which will provide on the Insight platform, or the Insight cloud, almost real-time assessment or real-time checks and remediations. So you will know almost immediately.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's very cool. I look forward to that. Another question, can the agent or scanner be set up to scan at certain times or when the load's on the processor, or is at its lowest?
So that's another great question. So the scanner usually runs, and Balut can correct me if I'm wrong, usually customers configure the scanner to run weekly. And that can be set to whatever schedule you want. So if you know that peak times in your organization are during business hours, or if you've got peak times overall for sales processes and stuff that you don't want scanning to occur, you can set all of that up, and you can have the scanner run in dead center of the evening when it's quietest. The agent runs its collections 4 times a day, which is more often, but it's only collecting on a single asset. And all of the processes on the agent run nice, meaning if anything else on the asset needs CPU or memory time, it will get it. And the agent will just slow down what it's doing. If resources are low on that asset, then the agent will run at as fast as it can, using as much resources as it can to get the job done as quickly as possible, assuming that somebody might be coming back to that asset and wanting to do something the next very second.
That's cool. That's cool that it has that ability. Another person here wants to know, what about scanning for VDI and other short-lived assets?
Yes, so VDI and short-lived assets are always a problem because you want to be able to collect information from those assets just in case they spin up repeatedly and one of them has a vulnerability. You need to be able to track down that vulnerability of the base image, correct it, and ensure that the next spin up is perfectly secure. Scanners can be a challenge with short-lived instances because, as I said, scanners usually scan like once a week, and the chance of that ephemeral asset being up during the instant that that scan happens is relatively small. So if you build the agent into your base image, it will do collection the instant it spins up. And then we have work on the Rapid7 side to definitely correlate those assets so that even though that asset went away, the next ephemeral time it comes up, you can remediate it.
Nice, nice. You'll have a solution here for everything. I like that. Another question here, is there a need to scan an endpoint which already has an agent deployed on it? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. We get that a lot. So the Rapid7 scan engine is very intelligent. And what it does during scans is the first thing it does on assets is check to see if that asset has an agent and check to make sure that the agent is doing everything that it's supposed to be doing. And then the scan engine will skip the detailed checks on that asset because it knows the agent is covering it. However, it will still do those remote checks that I mentioned in terms of probing open ports and looking for listening processes to ensure that all of the assets are fully covered. Deep interrogation from the agent, probing across the network from the scanner, and then you're saving the most amount of resource time on the scan engine, and the agent is just doing that individual collection on the individual assets.
Excellent, excellent. Well, let's see. I'm afraid that's all the time we have here in our schedule for our Q&A session. There's a lot more electronic questions for you there in the queue. Andrew and Balut, a really great presentation. Thank you so much for being on the EcoCast today.
Thank you.
And I encourage everyone out there to check out the handouts tab. It's there that you'll find a link to the rapid7.com website. And there specifically, it brings you to a on-demand demo of Rapid7 Insight VM. So make sure that you check that out. All right. Thank you to everyone who responded there to the poll question. We do appreciate your feedback on that. I will now hand it over to my fellow co-moderator, Mr. Scott Becker, to announce the winner of our next prize drawing.
Thanks, David. And let's get right into that prize drawing. So the winner of our next $500 Amazon gift card is Alan Trost from Washington, D.C. So congratulations to Alan. We'll be in touch about claiming your prize. And now it's time for our next presentation in the Protecting Endpoints EcoCast. And our next session comes from CrowdStrike. And presenting for CrowdStrike is Jason Wood, Senior Researcher for Tactical Intelligence. Jason, welcome to the EcoCast.
Hey, happy to be here.
Well, thanks for coming on. I'll turn it over to you.
All right, great. So, hey, everybody. Happy to be here talking with you. Today, I'm going to be talking about threat hunting and really around 0 days, or how intruders just kind of, how we can hunt intruders when we don't know where they're coming from. A little bit about me as we get started. Like Scott said, I am on the Overwatch team. I title actually changed very recently, now senior intrusion researcher. Really what that means is that I get to spend my time looking at hands-on intrusions committed by e-crime and state-sponsored adversaries that are out there. I originally started at CrowdStrike as one of the threat hunters focused on e-crime. And before that, I worked for quite a while as a penetration tester. I actually came up as a security engineer and system administrator. That's kind of my background. I do podcasting. I'm on Security Weekly News, usually every week, providing commentary there and involved with some instruction that I do as well. So just a little bit about me and where I come from and kind of I guess it provides some background on my perspective on a lot of what we do. So to start off with, I wanted to really talk a little bit about threat hunting and how we see threat hunting here at CrowdStrike, because it is a bit of a term that can mean different things depending on who you're talking to. And, really what we're looking for with threat hunting is the idea of we can't predict where adversaries are going to come from. We don't know how they're going to get around a security control. It's very, very apparent, at least in working with the intrusions that I see, that we have intelligent adversaries on the other side who are actively trying to get around defenses that may be built into environments. They're trying to do things to stay undiscovered long enough to accomplish their mission. The Overwatch team is, for example, is a threat hunting team geared up to operate 24/7. However, you build your own threat hunting team, you're going to need to have a bit of a methodology to guide your hunt so that this can be repeatable and you can bring in other people to accomplish that. We use an acronym here of SEARCH to describe what we do. Sense, enrich, analyze, reconstruct, communicate, and hone. And whatever it is we're doing as threat hunters, we need to get access to some kind of telemetry. CrowdStrike, obviously, we're focused on the endpoint, collect a lot of endpoint telemetry, trillions of events every week. I think actually it's currently about 7 trillion events per week is what we're ingesting. That allows us to put it onto our threat graph. It makes relationships, combine it with our threat intelligence that is provided by CrowdStrike Intel, and then use our tooling to do to enrich that and get it in front of a hunter to analyze the data, to hunt for how adversaries operate, signs that we have somebody in an environment doing something that we don't want them to do. Now, the process is going to be the same for any internal hunting team. You're going to have to pull in that data. You're going to have to put it into some tooling that allows you to make sense of it. We don't want to just be hunting through log files, raw log files. Maybe you put it into some kind of search engine and perform some analysis on it there. And then you want to reconstruct what the adversary is doing if there's any signs of a hunting lead, as we call it, that has been, or hunting leads that have been tripped or match what we're looking for, a hypothesis that we're doing a hunt on. And then we're going to turn around and communicate that to somebody to respond to it. Now, Overwatch, we're going to respond to our customers. But, if you are hunting inside your environment, you may be turning around and talking to an incident response team. And then last portion of this is hone, to constantly be improving and getting better at what we're doing. The adversaries change all the time in what they're doing, and we need to do the same. We need to be prepared for that and basically take what we've learned in our hunts as we're refining how we're observing adversaries behave and their changes over time, and pour that back into our methodology so that we are prepared for the next intrusion. One of the challenges that we have as threat hunters is that we do a lot of work and we're working with a ton of data, and not a lot happens until we see an adversary operating. And this is a kind of an illustration of threat hunting, really regardless of where you're at. This is geared, again, towards Overwatch. But you have all of this work occurring, or all this data and work occurring beneath the waterline where nobody can see what's going on. And, we're hunting through all kinds of telemetry. We've got our hunting leads queued up. We've got custom searches that we've created as hunters, looking for patterns of how adversaries operate. This starts to boil down to things that look definitely look suspicious as they're combined with each other, or the severity of what it is we're seeing. And we don't become visible as hunters until we do a notification, say, hey, we think we've got something here to take a look at. And this is going to be pretty indicative of any threat hunting program. You're going to look at a lot of stuff. And a lot of work is going to go into this before we finally pop out and say, hey, we've got one. We've got a potential intrusion. We need to start responding to it. So a lot of work is done to lead into this process and get to, matching up to malicious activity. And for us, we'll send out alerts via the Falcon interface, as well as sending direct contact messages to customers. So that's kind of, like I said, any threat hunting program is going to be dealing with that. Now, one of the questions, and this is kind of what drove my idea behind this presentation, is the idea of 0 days, something we don't know about. The very concept of a 0 day is that we just found out today that there's a vulnerability. Somebody published a report about it. And does it affect our environment? Where are the patches? Do we have patches for this? Are they available from the vendor? And then, we get a lot of questions. What is Overwatch doing? And you may get it if you're threat hunting. What are you doing to hunt for this latest vulnerability? And when I became a threat hunter, I was very, very concerned that I was going to miss something, miss that one thing that was going to break open an intrusion. There was going to be one key event that I had to catch. And somebody made this comment to me, an intrusion is never a single event. And I thought about that for a little bit. We talked about it, and I relaxed because I realized, intrusion never is just one thing. There's no particular exploit that somebody runs that gets them into the environment, moves them all the way through it, and accomplishes their mission and gets them back out again in one stroke. There's a lot of stuff that has to happen. And so I was thinking about Log4j. This is one we've been getting asked a lot about recently. But before that, last year, we were being asked about the Confluence vulnerability that was being actively exploited. And before that, at the late last year or 2020 going into 2021, you had the Exchange 0 day that had been published about, and actors were using it, and we were getting asked about that. And all of these intrusions, or all of these vulnerabilities, have a similar kind of thing that happens. There isn't a vulnerability out there and somebody exploits it. That's event one. Do we catch it or do we not catch it? That may depend on the visibility we have, telemetry that we may have as threat hunters. What we should be able to catch, though, are the actions on the host or the actions inside of the environment. Because now that the actor's in there, they're going to have to start to figure out what's going on here. Where am I in this environment? And where do I go about to accomplish my mission? So one of the things I wanted to frame up here as we look at 0 days, they are absolutely something we are concerned about as defenders. But at the same time, an attacker is going to have to do more than just exploit that to get what they want out of an environment. And so while we're concerned about this and we're going to look for signs of something like this being exploited, really the opportunity we have to detect them, if we're concentrating on the actions on the objective and picking up adversaries there, that moves the scale into our favor. You probably have heard people say defenders have to be right 100% of the time and the attacker only has to be right once. And that's true for initial exploitation. But as soon as they have exploited a vulnerability and they are in an environment, every command that they run gives us another hint to catch them, another opportunity to catch them. So now that scale flips around, and now the defenders only have to be right once to catch them, and the adversary has to be right every single time to avoid detection. So that's kind of why I wanted to frame this, to think about threat hunting. What is it that we're doing? We are assuming that somebody is going to get around to security control in some way. Maybe they just have credentials and they just log into the environment. But then they're going to have to take actions on a host, and that's where we as hunters are focused on. So I wanted to give a couple of examples here about how this has played out. This is actually an intrusion very, very recently discovered. This aquatic panda is what the Intel team at CrowdStrike has attributed this to. Basically exploiting a Log4j vulnerability on VMware Horizon. You know, just one of the applications that was affected by this. And one of the things that we found right away, again, the adversary gets onto the host, they've exploited it, great, I'm here. Where am I? What is this host? Where am I at in the network? Can I even reach the internet? You know, what's my accessibility there? And we saw commands like this being run. Now, these are not terribly, you know, these are just discovery commands. You know, you see them running who am I, and ipconfig, and then you see them sending a ping packet over to Google. They're looking at domain trust. They're enumerating computers inside of the domain computers group for the domain, basically remote host discovery there. These are all of the commands designed to get them focused on, you know, where am I at? Where do I need to go? Where is the data that I'm looking for? And, you know, how do I now go about accomplishing my mission? And this is, you know, where Overwatch jumped on this immediately. We started seeing the discovery commands and immediately notified the customer, hey, we've got a problem here. Looks like somebody, you know, we suspect that this is coming in through VMware Horizon based on some process information and things like that. But we were able to get them where this was occurring at, the host, the processes that were affected by it, and get them spun up to stop the adversary before they turned an intrusion into a breach. You know, yeah, they got onto a host, but now we can stop them before they go about accomplishing their mission. Turn the pages or the focus just a little bit here. This one was from an intrusion attributed to Labyrinth Chalima, which is a threat actor group understood to be sponsored by the North Korean government. In this case, they were doing defense evasion. They just appeared on this host. Maybe they had credentials when they got on it. You know, you can't always tell, at least on the hunting side of things, you know, how they got about onto a host or into an environment. That's where, you know, IR and forensics come into play. But as hunters, we can still see the activity going on. What was interesting about this intrusion was they did a lot of stuff to do defense evasion. And so you see devicesync.exe. That was actually a legitimate executable. Signed binary, it's totally legitimate. What was malicious, though, was this DLL called devobj.dll sitting in the same directory with it right there. And when the attacker ran devicesync, it looks around and says, oh, where's, you know, I need this DLL called devobj.dll. How do I get in? You know, where is it? Oh, it's right here in my directory. It loads it up and it contains the malicious code. This is an example of just kind of loading this sideloading this DLL right here. They also did some scripting around this to make some of this stuff simpler. What was interesting about this intrusion is that DLL file was new and novel. Nobody had seen that before. It wasn't in any public data that I could find that was available out there, and it wasn't in any of our telemetry. The Intel team was able to get a hold of that and do some reverse engineering and found that, hey, this is actually a new and novel tool. Nobody's seen this before. But threat hunting is able to find it. Why? Because they're taking these other actions on the host at the same time. Why is this occurring? Why would we have this file loading up from this location? And why is it loading a DLL sitting on the disk right next to it right here? That was just one of the hunting leads that we had created here inside of Overwatch to focus on for those types of techniques. So, you know, maybe not quite a 0 day here, but we don't know exactly where they came from. And the files that they're using are totally new and novel. We've never seen this before, but yet we're still able to spot that. We're coming up here towards our Q&A time. So I want to wrap up with this last intrusion, talking about, again, another new and novel implant that Overwatch spotted. One of our hunters is doing a hypothesis hunt. And they're looking around, they're like, you know, I know that actors will use scheduled tasks to maintain persistence inside of environments. So that's what they focus on. And if you've ever looked at the Windows operating system, you can see that there are tons and tons and tons of scheduled tasks out of the box just to keep this thing running normally. Then you add all the other tasks that businesses create to perform the function of the system underneath it or running on top of it. So they ran across this command, regserver32/s, and then it's loading C program files, theme explorer, themeexplorer.dll. The hunter thought, wow, that's a weird scheduled task. What's going on here? Why is a theme UI or modifier, which is what this kind of tries to blend into be, why is this being run directly from regserver32 on a DLL? Is there not an executable in this? Why is it running as a scheduled task? The path was globally rare, so they pivoted on this. They started digging into it more. They found some other files and activity that were around this and started going further. The victim of the environment the attack was able to send us the DLL. The Intel team takes their analysis of it. Turns out that this is a new and novel implant meant for espionage. Went after organizations in a particular area of the world, and they were kind of international orgs to accomplish some kind of good or mission in this area. And you only saw it in these types of environments. Turns out the DLL itself was doing some really crazy stuff to stay out of sight. It was a legitimate DLL that had been modified, had malicious code added to it. It was looking at GIF images on the hard drive and extracting payloads from there. Really went out of their way to blend in. No idea how they got into this environment in the first place. Was it a 0-day? Was it a credentials? Was it something else? Doesn't matter. We saw the activity. That's what we're after for hunting. That's why we do these types of hunts, because when we have these new and novel tools, that allows us to pick it up. We're going to see the activity around that. So really focus in on what threat actors are doing and the techniques that they use. I know we have a handout here for you all to take a look at, and it is basically our annual report to the public from our team, actually the team that I'm on. We wrote this, and it talks about a number of the intrusions we've seen, the techniques that are being used. You'll find in there tables of techniques that you can take a look at and say, okay, if this was run in my environment, how would I find it? And build that into your own program and to create your own hunting leads for your environment. So look for these types of reports, be it from CrowdStrike with our threat hunting report or other reports on intelligence. The global threat report from CrowdStrike actually was just released today. And look at that and then use that to feed your own hunting program. How can I take this information? How can I see if I can find this inside of my environment? What that allows you to do is get ahead of worrying about, what if a 0-day comes along? Look, threat actors are going to show up. Intrusions happen. Doesn't necessarily matter how they got there. We want to learn what that is and shore up defenses. But if, as hunters, we're assuming somebody's got around it and is now taking action on the host, and that's our opportunity to get in front of them and halt them before they actually accomplish their mission. So I just kind of want to reframe this look at hunting and how it can respond to this particular problem that we're dealing with. And with that, I'm going to open this up now to questions.
Okay,
and
great.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Really good stuff. And I'm going to put up the poll while we do questions about any additional information that people would like about the CrowdStrike solution. And that's really good to hear about your annual report. I'm going to have to check that out, and it sounds like that's hot off the presses.
I always recommend people take a look at that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to wrap my head around that 7 trillion events per week. That you mentioned. I mean, what does it take on the back end to process that event data into your threat graphs and other ways that you use that data?
Yeah, and this lines up actually with one of the questions I saw in the chat as well. Do we use some kind of novel AI engine to get through all of that data? Yeah. So I mentioned the threat graph. That is our proprietary graph database that we use to make a lot of these relationships. We are absolutely using a lot of proprietary tooling to do, when you get to that amount of data, you can actually do machine learning on data sets. And a lot of the information or the actions that the hunters are taking, marking different types of activity as malicious, feeds back into that machine learning automatically so that we only get better at that. But yeah, we are definitely believers in needing to have a human involved in threat hunting and looking at what's going on. At the same time, we absolutely need technology, and the technology is getting better and better out there to deal with this kind of data. So we want to take advantage of that tech.
Okay. Yeah, great. And thanks to Thomas for that question about the AI engine. Something else I noticed in your presentation that one of our attendees picked up on is your twist on the idea that the attackers only has to be right once, and kind of flipping that around where the defenders only has to be right once. And Digvijay says that's so true. An intrusion is never a single event. So just great point there, and thanks for making that point.
Yeah, that was an eye opener to me. I'll be honest.
I bet
somebody said that,
yeah.
And you're like, oh, I feel so much better now.
I know you always hear it the other way, and that's really an interesting way to think about it. Another one here, they're asking, how do we use your technology as a customer? What are the initial steps of creating a threat hunting team?
Good question. So obviously, there's a number of ways you can go about this. If you're looking at using the CrowdStrike platform itself, one of the good things about the CrowdStrike platform is the endpoint is fairly lightweight. You can install it, don't have to reboot systems and stuff like that. The data starts flowing in. It's a cloud-based system. There's no particular architectural requirements, like it has to route through the network to get to these these other systems to process the data. You just need to make sure that the endpoint can speak to the APIs on the other side of this, they're receiving this. So what happens is you install it, the data starts flowing in, and then if you wanted to do your own hunting on that, you will have that data inside of the event search and start building out your own hunts based on that data. Now, if you're looking at what would it take to get Overwatch to be involved and be part of that, honestly, it's as simple as you sign up for Overwatch and the data starts showing up for us. We see it actually pretty regularly. Somebody signs up. They didn't know they had an intruder inside of their environment in the first place. As they start deploying the endpoint, we start sending them notifications saying, oh, dear, you all have a problem and here's where it's at. So that's what it would take to get things started with us. But to do your own hunting, really take a look at some threat intel out there and start with some basics and start, okay, here's, I remember one time when the APT1 report came out, I was working as a pen tester and they were talking about some indicators there. And I just started doing some cursory hunts, like here's some IOCs associated with this. Can I find this in any of my data in my environment? And I started going from there. And then you just keep digging and researching, get more mature.
Okay, super. And here's another question they're asking that's kind of related to that. So if I'm hunting and I discover an actor operating on a host, how do I respond? What are sort of the next steps?
Sure. And this is one thing that I try and make a point of, particularly in articles that I am writing, is that we need to be prepared for that what next. I have absolutely worked in environments. I can remember a couple of intrusions early in my career that the incident response program is we got a lot of smart people. We'll depend on pluck and luck to get through this. Not where you want to be. So what are you going to do next? What if my hunters find something? Well, one, you need to know who you're going to communicate with. Who's on the IR team? Now, you may be on the IR team because you're, the size of your security team and stuff like that, but who are you going to notify? Who needs to get involved with this? You're going to have to notify, some management. We're going to have to start to pull in some resources, start to get our arms around this, triage it and see what's happening and determine whether or not we need to escalate this because Obviously we're not going to notify executives that somebody's desktop, had adware on it or something malicious and nothing else happened. But obviously, if it grows to a point that we need to involve like legal and stuff like that, be prepared for that. So think through that process. What would that look like for your environment? How do you build that out into your environment so that you're ready for it?
Okay, super. We probably have time for one more question here. We have one from Mark who asks, do you build relationships back to try and identify how the threat actor got into the environment in the first place? And then the example he provides is like phishing. Where do you find information about how actors perform their intrusions?
Absolutely. And it's a great question because it's obviously a question we all want answered. Like, how did they get here in the first place? My hunting lead may pick up on some activity, or hunting leads may pick up on some activity to key me in on this, but they got through and we want to know what that is. So this is where you tie in with incident response and the folks who are getting in here and looking and doing the analysis on what happened. This is where you also want to tie in with your operations team and those, your systems administrators, for example, with the phishing example, they're going to be the ones looking through your email defenses and tracing back on that message. Relationships are absolutely an important thing to do. So like for me, I have meetings every week with our incident response services teams to talk to them about what they're seeing and share stuff that we're seeing. And I try and give them things that are interesting to them so that, it's a relationship. You're exchanging things that we both want and are interesting. It gives us a chance to banter a little bit, stuff like that. So yeah, absolutely do that. Because if you've been in an incident and now you've in an environment and you've been in a situation where you have to rely on somebody that you have an adversarial relationship with or something like that, politics gets involved, this gets really awkward really fast. So take the time beforehand to prepare, build those relationships before you're on fire.
Excellent advice. Okay, Jason. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. But great presentation. Really appreciate all the insights, and I highly encourage people to download that handout. It's a PDF of the Nowhere to Hide 2021 Threat Hunting Report there in your handout section. So thanks for coming on, Jason. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Happy to talk to everybody. Appreciate it.
Okay, and now it is time for our next presentation in the EcoCast, and our next session comes from Duo. And presenting for Duo is Ganesh Umapathy, and he's Product Marketing Manager at Duo, and also Zoe Lindsay is going to moderate your questions for Ganesh. So I'm going to turn things over to Ganesh.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to attend this presentation. I'm Ganesh Umapathy, Product Marketing at Cisco Duo. And today we are going to talk about secure access best practices that can help organizations minimize risk of data breach. Here's a quick high-level agenda of the topics we'll be covering today. We'll talk about what the anatomy of modern phishing attacks look like today. And then we'll talk about how you can increase resistance to those kind of phishing attacks. Then we'll dive into some best practices that you can implement in your organization. This is based off the learnings from Duo as an organization of how we have implemented security within the organization. And then we'll end with why Duo is a good solution for you to invest in. So without further ado, let's get started. So let's talk about the anatomy of modern phishing attacks. Today, phishing attacks are no longer mass campaigns. They're highly targeted. The cyber criminals invest a lot of efforts in upfront social engineering to study their victims and target their specific organizations. And they craft really sophisticated phishing websites to steal the credentials that can trick even most savvy IT users. And then they leverage multiple man-in-the-middle techniques to get through any kind of security controls that organizations might have implemented. Typically, some organizations that have multi-factor authentication implemented but are not using a secure authentication option, man-in-the-middle attacks can circumvent those kind of MFA controls. For example, if they're using SMS or telephony kind of MFA options, man-in-the-middle attacks and spoofing techniques can get around those kind of controls and give access to cyber criminals into the application or the network. And once inside the network, cyber criminals constantly look for ways they can escalate privileges, move laterally to different parts of the network and applications. So this is the typical path we see today where cyber criminals gain unauthorized access into a corporate network. So what can we do as an organization? We can improve phishing resistance to these kind of sophisticated phishing attacks by choosing a higher level of assurance authentication options. What that means is using authentication options that can help or mitigate these kind of phishing attacks. For example, push notification offers a higher level of assurance than a voice call or an SMS, which can be easily spoofed or intercepted through kind of man-in-the-middle techniques. Using a FIDO2 authentication option that uses WebAuthn provides the highest level of assurance and is typically resistant to phishing attacks through compromised credentials. So that provides the highest level of assurance. So using this higher level of assurance options for authentication of methods for more critical applications is recommended. So that's one way of improving or increasing phishing resilience. Another control that we can leverage is verifying the device itself. So once an attacker gains access to credentials, and then he's using those credentials to gain unauthorized access into an application or a network, they're using their own device to do that. And typically those devices are not known to IT. The IT would not have seen that device before. So one way to add a layer of control, the security control there, is to check if the device is compliant with the organization's security policies. And a higher level of assurance is making sure that the device is enrolled in the organization's device management tool. So those are, again, two levels of assurance that you can help increase to mitigate these kind of phishing attacks and improve the resilience there. So again, for most applications, making sure that your device is up to date, does not have outdated OS or browsers, making sure the firewall is turned on, password is enabled, disk encryption is turned on. These are all common health checks that can help a device be compliant with organization's policies, and making sure it's managed where IT has a higher level of control over the device, that it's enrolled in device management tools such as Intune or joined to Microsoft Active Directory, where IT has full control of the device, can make sure there's nothing wrong or nothing suspicious going on in the device, gives the highest level of assurance from a device perspective. So those are some things that you can do to improve your phishing resistance to these kind of sophisticated attacks that we're seeing in the industry today. Now let's look at some best practices you can implement to simplify these secure access best practices. So starting off with the theme is making sure there's a balance between usability and security. Typically, if you invest or implement a lot of security controls, it becomes a barrier for employees to do work. It becomes a barrier for productivity, and typically that leads to bad practices, trying to circumvent the security policies, and that proves ineffective. The security proves ineffective. So there's a balance to be achieved between usability and security. On the usability side, making sure that the employees gain a delightful experience while accessing these corporate applications. What I mean by delightful experience is making sure that there's minimum user friction when they're accessing, whether it is multi-factor authentication or requiring a specific device to access. Our device needs to be compliant to certain standards, making sure that the user does not have to go through a lot of steps to do that. And providing flexible authentication options where applicable. For example, I talked about do a push notification or WebAuthn based security key could be a good the recommended option, but we understand that not all users will be able to use those options. So taking a stance on, okay, what kind of applications can have a lower level of authentication option, for example, hardware tokens. So that can really help provide a flexible option for applications that don't have critical data. And last but not the least, empowering the users with self-service. This is highly critical because then there's no bottleneck to employees. They don't if they want to add a new device to their MFA option, enroll a new device into their MFA option, then they are able to do so on their own. They don't have to log into IT and wait for IT to resolve it. So those kind of empowerment to the end user directly can go a long way into delighting their user experience. On the security side, we can implement policies that can help achieve defense in depth. In security, we say there's no silver bullet. So obviously, making sure that they have a strong authentication, a strong MFA option with the highest level of assurance option possible for that use case, making sure the context is correct. By context, I mean that location of access is verified, making sure they're not the location of access is not suspicious, not coming from any location that you don't have employees in, making sure the devices are of a certain security standard, and things like that. And last but not least is monitoring the login activity across your organization, making sure there's no anomalous behavior for user login. That typically those kind of anomalous login behavior, multiple failed attempts at login, these kind of indicate an ongoing attack. So identifying that and realizing that and taking action can mitigate breaches. So that's really important to monitor what's happening in the organization. Again, on the security side, you can also improve security posture by adding more granular policies for you can segment applications based on the level of sensitive data that they hold. We can have risk-based policies for each application. Again, on the device side, you can prompt hygiene updates every time Microsoft releases a new Windows update. There is security enhancements, and that same with macOS from Apple, making sure those updates are patched. Those devices have patched with those updates. That's highly critical. And also making sure that there's a lot of integration with their applications, making sure all your applications have the strong authentication and device verification before granting access. And last but not the least here is building a strong security culture, making sure that the users are part of your security program. They understand why they're why they're using multi-factor authentication, and the importance of making sure that when they approve a multi-factor authentication and when not to approve. So that goes a long way by making your employees part of your security program. So now let's talk about why Duo. One of the reasons customers choose Duo is because we are platform agnostic. We can come in and integrate with customers' existing infrastructure. What I mean by that is our organizations are using Microsoft Active Directory or Okta's user directories. And irrespective of the identity provider or their endpoint tools that organizations use, we can come in and integrate with these different tools and serve as the single layer of access security solution where you can centralize access management policy. So we can get intelligence and context from identity providers, endpoint protection tools, and device management tools, and use all that context into delivering a secure access for end users. From a device context perspective, we provide one of the richest device signals into every access decision that's made. We have something called as Device Health application. That's a lightweight application that's installed on Mac OS and Windows devices, and the Duo mobile app on iOS and Android devices, which provide intelligence such as operating system version, browser version, disk encryption status, password status. And all these signals are analyzed at the time of access. And we can also check if the device is enrolled in a device management tool, In some cases, we can check if the endpoint agent is present, antivirus agent is present, and if the antivirus agent has detected any malware on the device. So all those third-party posture signals we are able to collect and use it to make an access decision for that specific user and device. So for example, here, if the user is accessing Salesforce, for example, the first use case on the top right here, allow access for secure and compliant unmanaged devices. For Salesforce might be an option, might be a tool where you're allowing access to unmanaged devices, but for certain internal devices, maybe payroll information or HRMS application, you want to allow access only from a managed device. So that's the second use case there, where certain applications are allowed access only with managed devices. And the last use case there is we found that the device is either not compliant or infected with the malware. We can block access for that specific device, and the user can log in from a compliant device or a non-infected device. So those are some of the use cases that we can cater to with our device trust capability. One of the benefits of our solution is it's easy to use, not just for end users, but also for our administrators. So as you can see, there's no coding required. It's all UI-based, click-based policies that and integrations that administrators can add. This helps organizations to get up and running in minutes. We've had organizations deploy Duo over a weekend to enable a remote workforce. So that's really one of the benefits that we can provide to organizations is the speed to deployment and speed to security. And for end users, again, it's that notion of any self-service. Here you can see, for example, if a device is out of date, the Windows OS is not up to date, and disk encryption is not turned on, and if the user has admin rights to those devices, that device, he can go in and update the OS and security settings to make the device compliant with the organization's policies. So this is another cool scenario where the user is able to go and remediate his endpoint device and then access applications in a compliant manner. Some of the common use cases our customers use Duo for is to gain visibility into devices. Centara Healthcare, which is one of the largest nonprofit healthcare organizations, they were able to consolidate their MDM budget with multi-factor authentication budget. Because Duo was, by deploying Duo, they found 2 times the devices they assumed were on the network. So we were able to come in and provide that level of visibility into the device accessing the network. And within a few months, they were able to deploy Duo to over 60,000 users and reduce costs because they were able to consolidate the 2 capabilities into one solution. Lyft, again, one of our big customers, they use Duo to provide secure access to managed devices. Again, they were able to reduce costs because again they were able to consolidate multiple solutions into multiple use cases into one solution. We provide secure access to over 4,500 managed devices and improve productivity through ease of use and help reduce costs there. Another use case we served is ensure the device is secure before granting access. Financial Force is a customer that uses Duo for that. At the time of this creating this presentation, Financial Force assessed posture of over 800 devices at the time of authentication and helped users update the devices on their own without requiring help desk help. So that was a big impact to Financial Force. And last but not the least is the ability to comply with regulations. Many regulations stipulate multi-factor authentication as an required access control, such as HIPAA and PCI DSS, but they also go one step further and require additional access controls, such as making sure the device is managed and devices are of a certain security standard. Zenefits is a company that uses Duo to address these compliance regulations. They work in the HRMS space. So with Duo, they're able to verify that over 600 devices are enrolled in their management tool. They're able to comply with HIPAA and CCPA through the detailed audit logs we provide and the reporting that we can generate. And we provide compliant access for both unmanaged and managed devices. So the key takeaways from today's presentation is that making sure that you understand what the secure access use cases are and start with MFA. MFA is really the basic security control that can mitigate over 99% of those cyber attacks. So, and apply defense in depth for secure access. So MFA is one security control. Think about what additional policies that you can implement over MFA, such as location-based policies or device verification-based policies. And last but not the least, emphasize user experience and security culture, because making users a part of your security program really builds a strong foundation for security of the organization. With that, thank you for your time and attention, and I'd like to see if there's any questions available.
Thank you, Ganesh. Thank you for that content. We do have some questions here that came in. The first one that we got, fair question. Why can't we just block users from having personal devices entirely?
That's a good question. In today's day and age, it's all about choice. And it's also about cost for the organizations. BYOD has multiple benefits for both organizations and users. Users have the ability to log in and be productive whenever they want, wherever they want on any device. And organizations don't have to spend a lot on making sure that they ship a managed device or a corporate-owned device to every user all the time. So there's multiple benefits of allowing personal devices for work. At the same time, you have to make sure that it's secure. So for a modern organization to support a modern workforce, it is imperative to embrace personal device for work, but at the same time, making sure that they do it in a secure manner. So that's really important.
Absolutely. And what do you do for a user that loses their enrolled device?
If an enrolled device is lost, it's important to communicate that to the IT team. And also, if self-service is enabled, you could go and deregister that device so that that device is not used again for multi-factor authentication, and then the IT can take the next steps on what they can do to lock up the device. So, but it's important to communicate it to the IT first.
And with the increase in news about attacks targeting them, are you using things like phone callback or SMS passcodes still secure MFA options?
We talked about this a little bit at the beginning of this presentation. Phone callbacks and SMS are do not provide a high level of assurance for multi-factor authentication. So it's our recommendation that you use push notification, or even better, a FIDO2 certified security key that uses WebAuthn. Those provide the higher level of assurance for multi-factor authentication. So telephony and SMS are prone to spoofing attacks, man-in-the-middle attacks, and don't offer the same level of assurance. We have seen attacks where cybercriminals have used those techniques and overcome those security controls if they're using SMS and telephony. So it is our recommendation that you don't use them, but we do understand that it is, in some cases, it may not be possible to use other options. So in those cases, if you're using those SMS and telephony, we want to make sure there are additional security controls in place to mitigate any kind of attacks that might go on.
Excellent. Ganesh, thank you for that great information. Thank you to our audience for your questions. If you have any other questions, please send them along and we'll be happy to follow up with you. We hope you enjoy the rest of today's event and have a great day.
Okay, thanks Ganesh and Zoe. We do have a poll question for you. We appreciate your feedback on additional resources you'd like to see from Duo. And I'm only going to leave this up for a minute, so you don't have as long as usual to fill this one out. It's the options that you're familiar with: data sheet, technical white paper, case studies, pricing details, etc. So if you could fill that out, we do really appreciate it. And it looks like we had a lot more questions that we unfortunately don't have time for right now, but Ganesh and the Duo team will see your questions and be able to get back to you. And thanks to everybody who responded to the poll. We do appreciate your feedback. I'll just leave it up there for another moment, and then we will move on to our next presentation. I'd also like to remind you about the handouts. We do have a link there for Duo where you can get more information about them. Be sure to check that out if you'd like some more detail. And with that, Ganesh, great presentation today. Thank you so much for educating us on Duo. And now it's time for our next session in the Endpoint Protection EcoCast. And our next session comes from CyberArk. And presenting for CyberArk is Adam Markert, Solutions Architect. Adam, welcome to the EcoCast.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Yeah, take it away.
Perfect. Oops. Okay, we'll start here. Well, thank you so much to the Actual Tech Media team for having us and for all of you who are joining. I know that I'm the presenter, unfortunately standing between you and lunch or perhaps afternoon coffee, so we'll be mindful of the time while we dive into the topic of endpoint security. I so wish that we could be meeting here in 2022 to talk about anything except ransomware, and in fact, much of what we will cover today is valuable advice against many other attack vectors. And I think you'll see that analyzing our foundational endpoint security controls through the lens of ransomware defense can make a lot of sense for our security posture overall. And ransomware, of course, has proved to be such an enduring and costly problem that we really can't ignore it. The good news is there's an awful lot we can do to tighten up the gaps in our defenses through which ransomware continues to infiltrate. So I am Adam Markert, Principal Solutions Architect at CyberArk Software. I've been with CyberArk for about 3 years. Started out as a pre-sales engineer, focusing on identifying solutions to customer problems, particularly in the privileged access management space, and assisting them with everything from RFPs to POCs. For most of my career, however, I was working in-house as a network engineer, systems administrator initially, and eventually as a security architect. Always in regulated industries like food and beverage manufacturing, finance, and healthcare. And that experience has really influenced how I continue to think about security problems and solutions. It's very kind of what would I have done back when I was a customer. And of course, I've been a customer of many of the presenters on this call, so it's a real privilege to be on the line with all of them. So I'd like to discuss today an important idea that does not get adequate attention, and it's this idea of deprivileging the attacker. The key takeaway from this presentation is really going to be for you to reevaluate the foundational endpoint security and identity controls in your organization. On this slide, I've got a few of these foundational endpoint controls that I'm referring to. Identity security, of course, so that we can know and authenticate and control what entities are accessing the endpoints in the first place. Effective access management, so we can understand what those entities have access to, manage their life cycles through onboarding and role transitions and separations. And of course, least privilege, so we can ensure that they have enough access to do their authorized activities, but not excessive privileges that could enable certain attack paths, many of which have been discussed here already. And finally, application control. And that's really so that you can have full control over what applications can launch, both with normal user permissions and which applications can launch with an elevated set of permissions. Interesting point is that properly implemented, these controls alone can give you a very high level of protection against ransomware. And we actually test this particular stack in our own labs. And we've ran over 3 million ransomware samples against it, and it's been 100% effective. And we'll explain why in a little while. Now, there is that old saying that in order to prevent that successful attack, we, as the defenders, need to be 100% successful. And the attacker only needs to be right once. I really actually think that Jason from CrowdStrike made a great point earlier. Each step in an attack gives us another chance to either detect that attack or even better, to create friction by blocking subsequent steps in the attack. Ideally, we're doing both. Now, usually an attacker is assumed to be low privilege because they've compromised an end user through phishing or other means. That end user may only have normal user permissions. on their machine. And while they may indeed be low privileged at the moment of compromise, we know from studying advanced persistent threats that attacker doesn't intend to remain low privileged. They're going to do everything in their power to perform reconnaissance and to escalate their privileges, often by compromising a more powerful account. The moment they do that, then many of our normal EDR controls may be rendered less than effective. And here's the great danger. Whether we are discussing a motivated, privileged insider, or whether we're imagining the next SolarWinds style supply chain attack, we need to assume that the attacker is privileged and to set up our defenses in depth so that if the attacker succeeds in disabling or uninstalling or otherwise tampering with any one of our controls, we have others that can continue to slow the attack. A very critical thing to remember is that when we investigate major breaches, usually email filtering is in place, usually EDR and next-gen AV and even MFA is in place. And those tools are doing an incredible job stopping the vast majority of viruses and malware and ransomware. And you've heard today from some of the top players in this space already. I mean, they do amazing work, but we all work better together when we're developing layered defenses. Now, for better or for worse, privileged identities are likely always going to be around in some form. I mean, we need them to manage our infrastructure and to configure and support new services. They're used extensively in everything from traditional on-prem system administration to the most modern CI/CD pipelines in cloud-native infrastructure. And yet we know from research that fully half the Microsoft vulnerabilities from 2020 could not be launched by a non-admin. So think about that. We certainly need privileged access, but much of the time, attackers do as well. This presents us with a huge risk reduction opportunity if we can implement least privilege effectively. And the good news is that there are straightforward and effective ways for you to do this. So one goal that we have is ultimately to remove full local admin rights from day-to-day use and to provide a more refined set of policies that allow more granular elevation of certain apps for certain users under certain conditions. So a help desk technician can run some things in control panel and install approved apps, for example, but not execute arbitrary PowerShell commands as a full local admin. You want that backup administrator to log into a backup server or service, run the approved admin privileges, but not be able to execute ransomware accidentally or deliberately that encrypts the backup storage locations. Now, many of you here today, particularly in energy and utilities and manufacturing spaces, you may use third parties to manage critical services. Those third-party vendors that support building controls or industrial controls and OT environments, those are all vectors for possible attack. But there are also opportunities for us to tighten up those endpoint and identity controls. I was giving another talk quite recently, actually, and the moderator polled the audience with a question, and he asked, if you had to pick one security tool, what would it be? And the answers, predictably, were kind of all over the map. Some were really pleased with their EDR solutions. Some thought that their SIM and the visibility was most important. Others found that training or email filtering really brought the biggest rewards. And I mean, as much as we all enjoyed that little thought experiment, no one security solution is going to solve all the problems. No one security solution is going to stop every attack. Those layered defenses continue to be critical. And we like to think of endpoint privilege management as really complementary to EDR. If we think like an attacker and we imagine the inevitable zero-day ransomware attack that slips through, how are you going to make that attacker's job difficult? So we can have controls, for example, that don't allow execution of unapproved software. You can strictly limit privileged access to approved functions so that those admin-dependent vulnerabilities can't even execute. We can disallow rights to critical file types, of course, from unapproved packages. And you may even want to require MFA for certain operations. These are all possible things you can do, and each one could be the thing that ultimately stops a successful attack, even the 0 days. And at the very least, it can slow that attack down enough to buy your SOC team more time to discover and mitigate the attack before it progresses and becomes too late. Now, there are no free lunches, of course. And we do have to consider costs, but let's focus on the cost of inaction for a moment. I was at one of the industry conferences probably about 5 years ago, and the keynote speaker was sort of a well-respected individual in the security industry, and they were kind of openly worrying about this sort of new advent of cyber insurance. And the fear was that, as people just adopted cyber insurance, they were just going to transfer the risk of cyber incidents to insurance companies. All of our budgets would dry up. We wouldn't be able to hire anybody or buy any tooling to run a security program. Now, at the time, there was not a ton of actuarial data on cyber incidents, certainly not at the level that they've had for healthcare and auto insurance for decades, for example. But give them time. Nobody understands the quantification of risk like insurance companies. And those of you that have had to work on risk assessments and insurance applications will know what I'm talking about. If there are risk factors to be understood, they will make it their business to understand them. And so, of course, that didn't happen. We didn't all just lose our jobs. But this growing popularity of cyber insurance, coupled with the increase in the number and the price tag of the claims over the last several years, and the better understanding of cyber risk factors is leading to a few trends that you see here. One is that cyber insurance premiums have grown incredibly rapidly. If we look at data from last year, 30% month-to-month growth, just really astonishing. And the other trend is that certain capabilities are just required now for even getting a policy underwritten or for renewing an existing policy. So among those controls are things like multi-factor authentication, of course, configured in the right places, privileged access management, and endpoint privilege management, as well as others. Now, non-compliance can often get you faced with non-renewal or huge premium hikes. So all of that said, we know that compliance and security are not the same thing exactly. MFA can't solve everything. It can't secure access necessarily to all shared privileged accounts. For example, we still need, PAM to do things like enforce accountability and audit and tying access to a specific person. And EPM in particular adds this additional layer of protection with really policy-based just-in-time elevation. I was glad to see some of the earlier presentations bring up the MITRE ATT&CK framework. When I look at the attack techniques, particularly when we're talking about ransomware, we look for what makes a ransomware attack unique. It's not much different, it turns out, from other attack types. The real differences tend to show up in the last couple stages, exfiltration and impact, right? Sort of the execution of the end game, either to extort money or to just have a denial of service type of effect on an organization to sort of disrupt their operations. So the good news is that the benefit is by solving for ransomware, we also defeat a huge number of other attack types. So by implementing those foundational identity security controls, we've really stripped the attacker of most of the tactics that they have available, and it creates friction for them at every step. With these controls in place, of course, it gets very hard to do things like harvest credentials, or to move laterally, or to escalate privileges, or in many cases, to even establish that initial foothold in the first place. So proper least privilege implementation complements that traditional endpoint security stack. It's going to allow for earlier detection and different types of detections, we might add, and creates a lot of preventive opportunities for stopping attacks before they turn into a breach. So what are some of these specific things that we can do with endpoint privilege management? To kind of remember, with EPM working with an authenticated user already on an endpoint, it really does represent, in many ways, our last line of privilege defense. We're going to assume we already have somebody that's been compromised, something got through the email filter, they've executed something, we've got an authenticated user running some arbitrary code on an endpoint. Well, so the specific controls we would be looking to employ, that's going to prevent this attack from escalating further, are first to start with least privilege management. And so this is going to involve removing those unnecessary admin rights And this is particularly useful in the case of individuals that might have direct membership of local admins or the wheel group if it's a Linux or Mac machine. We want to remove that standing access. It can't be abused if it's not there, right? And then we want to identify really what it is that a user runs that requires elevation and make more just-in-time policies that allow certain things to elevate. That alone eliminates a huge surface for abuse. Also, we want to manage those local admin credentials. This really is aimed at preventing lateral movement risk. We want to make sure that every machine's local admin credentials are unique, are complex, and change all the time. We also want to remove any redundant local admin group members and protect the unauthorized modification of privileged user groups. Then, of course, we want to look at application control. Part of this is understanding what's already in the environment, kind of a software catalog, what users are launching, what requires normal rights versus privileged access, and where apps come from. Were they downloaded from the internet, or were they installed from a trusted network location? Were they distributed via a software distribution system like SCCM or Intune or Jamf, or were they sideloaded from some USB drive? You can make very different decisions on how you treat applications by how well you trust their sources, their signatures, and other details. Just-in-time elevation. Just-in-time has become kind of a buzzword in the industry. What I'm talking about often with least privilege and the automatic elevation of individual processes is conceptually just-in-time. But it can also mean that we add temporarily a user to a specific privileged group. And that's, in this case, what we mean here. So this can help operationally when an admin or developer does need to just be a member of that group temporarily. But here we can require justification, audit, strong authentication, and of course, time limits to reduce that risk. Now, some of these controls on the bottom here are specific to attack scenarios. Credential defense is critical, and it's not to be limited to just like the operating system. There's a lot of tools that will help defend against that. Of course, EPM does as well. But we go a little bit further and we look at things like browser credential stores. Lots of privileged credentials can be stored there and are often stored in other tools as well. Think about your remote access tools, file transfer utilities, cloud consoles. These things have well-known file system and registry locations for storing those credentials. Sometimes they're even in plain text, frighteningly enough. And attackers know how to exploit those. So think about endpoint controls that can detect the normal access of those credential stores from the abnormal access via some other malware. Ransomware protection, we really want ransomware protection that augments what your EDR tools and others are already doing. Since we're not trying to replace those tools, they have advanced definitions and behavior analysis and heuristics and things you've heard about today, and they can detect a lot of known and even new variants of ransomware. What EPM can offer is the ability to identify your critical data up front and to take a more allow list approach to defining what apps the user can use to modify business critical data. This way, even though zero-day ransomware is going to be unable to perform file system writes to those folders and files, even if that end user has permission to. And finally, privilege deception. So this is for those of you that like to take a more proactive or a threat hunting type of perspective. So think about ways that you can create traps for attackers, things like credential lures that you can spread throughout the environment, and then of course monitor and alert you of the presence of a malicious actor. So if you are at all curious about any of these controls or identity security, privileged access management, or endpoint privilege management, feel free to head on over to cyberark.com for more information. For EPM in particular and the controls we talked about in this talk, you can access the free trial at this link on the next slide here. And you can, of course, click that link below, get a 30-day free trial, and work with one of our talented engineers to kind of effectively implement these least privilege controls allow that just-in-time access and elevation, control apps and stabilize configurations in your environment, stop ransomware, and of course, prevent credential theft and mitigate lateral movement. So I think we are cool. Thank you so much for your time today, by the way. And don't forget to download the solution brief that's in the handout section. If this video happens to make its way onto YouTube, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and ring that bell. And with that out of the way, I think we have a few minutes left for some Q&A.
We sure do. Yeah, really nice presentation, Adam. And I do want to put the poll up here for any additional information that you'd like about the CyberArk solution, in addition to that solution brief from CyberArk that is in the handouts. So I guess I'll just say, Adam, I really appreciated 2 points that you made. One was about that high percentage of Microsoft vulnerabilities, that rely on elevated privileges. That's just such important context. And then the other thing that really kind of shook me was the monthly increase in cyber insurance, costs. That 30%. I think that was on premiums. That was really eye-popping. So thanks for sharing that data. We've had a lot of customers kind of come to us with gaps that they might have, and they've brought these things up to us, and it was helpful to find that there's actually data publicly available that supports that this is a real thing happening. Yeah. So let's get into the audience questions. The first one here, they're asking, how does CyberArk EPM compare to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint? Yeah, so we'll kind of address how does it compare just more generally to other EDR tools. I mean, Defender being one, of course. And the answer is that it's really a largely complementary solution. They have almost non-overlapping functionality sets. EPM really addresses the local administrator right problem that is so prevalent. With local admin rights present, things like Microsoft Defender can be shut down or bypassed. And this has happened, of course, in a lot of past attacks. So really what we're doing is kind of going above and beyond what might already be present in those tools. We're not trying to reinvent everything that they do. We really just want to make sure that users cannot elevate arbitrary applications, that we define what they can elevate up ahead, and that we add some other pieces to this puzzle here where we can more effectively support kind of a holistic identity security solution. And that's going to be things like preventing lateral movement and preventing credential theft from various places where it has actually been a problem based on those attack researches. Okay, all right, great. Hey, this next question comes from Jen, and it's a question for all the MSPs out there. Does CyberArk integrate with RMM software like ConnectWise or Kaseya? That's a great question. In particular, with EPM, I'm not positive of any out-of-the-box integrations, but there is an API available. For example, we do integrate with a lot of other solutions for like workflow and stuff. So there are integrations available with ServiceNow. There are integrations for SIM solutions, and there will be some additional ones coming for some of the EDR type solutions as well. So we'd have to kind of figure out exactly what the functionality is that they're looking for, and then we can kind of make a better plan for integration there. Okay, great. Hey, Log4j has been on a lot of people's minds. Thomas is asking, Log4j could be effective without admin rights. Would this suite also detect that type of activity? Yeah, so one of the things that it can help with is with establishing, and this kind of goes beyond Log4j. One of the issues that people have with Log4j is just understanding all of the endpoints and what their whole software inventory was. If you didn't have that information handy, it was really difficult to know what machines were vulnerable and what needed to be patched. So one of the things that EPM can do is help you establish that inventory, so at least you'll know if there are vulnerabilities.
certain vulnerabilities, there are mitigations that EPM can help with. I think we actually have some information published about Log4j that we can probably link to, or at least respond in a private email with some additional resources. Log4j, there's a couple of our products have ways that they can help.
Okay, super. Another question from Digvijay, who's asking, how does the deception solution fit within the MITRE SHIELD framework?
Yeah, so in particular, our privileged deception is really there, similar to I think what Huntress was discussing earlier. The idea here is that if we're attempting any kind of threat hunting, we want to put some breadcrumbs out there, or honeypots, for example, for the attackers to stumble across and try to compromise. So with EPM, what it's able to do, since we have an agent running already, that agent can create these accounts that we call credential lures that look appealing to an attacker as an account that they might be able to use to potentially move laterally or to escalate privileges. And of course, the EPM agent is just then sort of watching if anything tries to log in with that account, tries to reset that account's password, et cetera. So it's really there as kind of a detective control that can help, with that threat hunting.
Okay, super.
Of course, we will lock that account out and not allow it to log in if somebody tries to actually use it. We're not going to create a weapon that the attacker can really leverage.
Oh, that's good. Okay, next question comes from Fatan, who's asking, does this solution provide visibility of my entire environment and activities, happening across on-premises networks, public cloud accounts, business cloud apps like Office 365, et cetera, or is it really targeted at one or another kind of part of the environment?
Yeah. So endpoint privilege management in particular is focused on endpoints. So that's going to be on the Windows side, both server and workstation OSs. Mac OS is of course supported as well, and we have EPM for Linux is currently in public beta. That will be, that will have its GA probably later this year. So it's going to be really focused on things with an operating system. We do integrate with certain other cloud services like our own CyberArk Identity, IDP, as well as Azure AD. But for now, EPM is really focused on endpoint, things with an operating system that really have most of the least privileged problems. We do have other solutions that can look at cloud platforms and stuff, but that's probably a conversation for another day.
Okay, fair enough. Unfortunately, Adam, it looks like we're running out of time, but I did want to ask you, if somebody wants to get started, with CyberArk, what's kind of a good first step? And I did go ahead and pop up that slide again that has the URL there, because I suspect that might be part of your answer, but
yeah, for sure. So it would really be kind of evaluate what you have in place already as far as the controls that we've been talking about today. If you found gaps there, or if you've got other gaps related to privileged access management in particular, or identity security more broadly, or like you kind of mentioned, you're worried about the security of your cloud environment, you don't have good visibility into the entitlements of those cloud users, those are all things that we can help with, and those solutions are all available and with lots of other documentation at cyberark.com. And then, of course, there are forms there where you can request or reach out to us directly, and we can talk about where your organization is and schedule any follow-up calls and demos that might be relevant.
Okay. Well, Adam, great presentation today, and thank you so much for bringing us up to speed on CyberArk.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It's been great.
Okay, and now it's time for our final prize drawing, and the winner of the final $500 Amazon gift card is Tom Bennett from Virginia. So congratulations to Tom, as well as our previous winners, Florante Santos and Alan Trost. We'll be in touch about claiming your prizes. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I do want to thank all of our presenters today for putting together such great presentations and providing all of their insights on the Q&A sessions. I also want to thank all of our participants for making this event possible. KnowBe4, Sophos, Huntress, Rapid7, CrowdStrike, Duo, and CyberArk. And finally, we'd like to thank all of you for attending today's EcoCast from Actual Tech Media and for, of course, all of your great questions. That concludes today's event. Have a great rest of your day.